Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. This is story about what if Naruto hates the world and join Akatsuki part 1. Before I start, please do support for more amazing content and comments for part 2. Do consider to subscribe my channel and share my video to your friends and check out the description as well. Let's start the video. He always meant to go home. But as much as he was titling and spinning and falling, it was inevitable that intentions and actions took different turns. But if he was honest, and he wasn't, not really, not always, it might just have been rage. Or perhaps it wasn't. He didn't know, and if he did, he was very good at pretending otherwise. It wasn't just rage in any case, not when he knew defeat and bitterness and scorn and, dare he say it, hate. It was all that and desperation fueled by horror and dread and someone, anyone, vulnerable hurt. So although he always meant to go home, he was very much fearful that the moment he saw familiar gates he'd finally go mad. That was a promise his body made even as his mind fell into a jittery mess saying no, and why won't it end? And they wouldn't know, couldn't image the truth made an hour/day/year/lifetime ago. He really had meant to go home. Honest. Or maybe not. He'd never wanted what he'd been given and hated everything he hadn't. He really couldn't swallow the poison, believe it. Once more. Smile for me. Suffer for me. Prove the better person. Would it end now? Do you promise? Typical. Promises made to him were never worth the breath wasted in their uttering. You were wrong, Yudame. You were wrong, Gigi. You were wrong, Erosenin. You were wrong, but the dead have no shame left in them. Did they have any to begin with? Dust and ashes and living chakra. Did you see the trail of infant blood, or was it just a dream? Fitting then. A life that had no beginning, how could it, when name and blood and clan were denied him, should then have no ending? Parents? I don't know, my boy, they must have died in the QB attack. Forever and ever and ever. Left breaking and falling and shattering, and didn't you promise one day it would stop? This was cursed fate. He had always meant to go home. That was his only thought centuries/years/months/days ago. That was his last dream, even as his body broke/shattered/fell apart. Alive and dead and caught in between as men in red clouds and black skies took his burden. Goodbye, Demon Fox. Was it really so awful to have one precious/beautiful/bright/living second when he wasn't dying under a nine-tailed nightmare? 18 years of red shadow death for 1 second of finally being alone. It wasn't so bad to die then, wasn't so bad to finally leave it all behind. Hadn't he been brave? Hadn't he believed in people? Loved them? Fought for them? Never blamed them? Even when he was crying/yelling/faltering and seeing the nothing born of something? And hadn't anyone realized? No one had ever said thank you. His life, existence, was not among Kami's gifts, not when it was perverted to fit the desires of frightened men. And not even his enemies would give him what his allies didn't, not so different after all. They tore his body apart, broke the seal, and took the last of bijus into their dreams. But they were kind. And this was their gift. They never looked away as he faltered in the middle of their circle, died in a cave with no name and no light. They saw him when so few people ever had. But even for all their power, they were still human and silly and blind. Stupid. Stupid of them not to keep watching. They should have. Shinobi had already proven the unnaturalness of their imagination. Even the dead could lash past the grave. And this was Kyubi's gift, 18 years and only 6 scars to mark the time. Never ill and never anything but physically perfect in all that time. This everyone had vaguely realized but never really considered. And this is when the world stops working. He did not live, and he did not die. He was and he wasn't, and might just have been a second too early or a second too late. He didn't really remember, only that the world broke and he fell along with it. And this is what happened. He only started thinking a millennium/second/year/hour later. He was hungry and naked and shaking so badly, and he might have broken again when he realized not even 6 scars were there for the horror. Of the 9 shinobi that were scattered in pieces and parts of familiar red, only one still sputtered with life. What are you? And then even he was dead. Didn't you promise it would be over? And this is what he did. The glowing/grinning/howling ceiling statue wouldn't stop looking at him. So he broke it. When he finally woke, still alive, and why couldn't he finally sleep, he scavenged rags to dress in from among the 9 dolls lying around. He started walking and thinking, and somewhere along the way he realized if he saw his home again he might just end the world and everyone along with it. He'd always understood and done what little was in his power when he'd forgiven them. He understood. Honest. He gave his life for everyone who loved and hated and might just not have cared either way. So even if it wasn't his choice, he still gave his life for his home. And then he hated them when he realized he had not died, stayed dead, and just might never die. It would never be over. So it was only when the fox was truly dead that he did what he never had before. Naruto hated. And he lived. In the beginning he hated and hated knowing he did not know how to live, not in the way that mattered. A lifetime spent reaching for strength, higher and farther than anyone can see because he remembers, nights huddled and weak, furious when fists make no dent and words were his only strength. He learned, memorized, innumerable ways to kill and capture and trap and distract, but when the ground shatters under his feet he is left with nothing but a kunai to hold. He does not want to live, not die, never die like that. Even if he doesn't really know what he is, not anymore. Because he is different. Not like the 9 dolls left in pieces in a cave only he knows, and not like 8 other existences painted by sacrifice. He has left their circle of power and capture and fallibility. They have never known the feeling of stars and suns burning under skin, of endless tundras of ice, of impenetrable night, and light only the blind can see, known the feeling of life and death, of ending and beginning and eternal brilliance. They have never known. And he knows, trembling / standing / breathing under a mountain of insurmountable knowledge that can never be described with any man-made language. He does not want to live, not die, never die like that. That is how it starts. He has never been the quickest, the strongest, the fastest, the best, or really anything that mattered. He has always been last. Moron. Unwanted. A nuisance. Dope. He was not among the first to simmer in the depth of their own hate, scarred forehead and blind eyes, lonely and angry and red spinning betrayal. But this is why they were different. Although he hated and would have killed if given the chance, he has always known better. In this he was first among all those he knew. He turned from his hate, turned from the path, and while he did not forgive, he did not mind forgetting. Or perhaps he did. It did not matter. The ones he really wanted to hurt were dead already. This is how it starts. He walked for a while, thinking and not thinking and figuring out what became of his life. So between one sunrise and another, Akatsuki was just another red dawn. He found himself before 2 graves. Of the demon of the bloody mist he did not care. He was a man who lived and died and took everything he wanted with him. But the snowbird was different, just another little boy staring at a world that did not want him, had never cared enough to know him. Haku, a boy too gentle to kill and forever denying a blood-stained name. It was the only way for a bloodline clan to end, that condemned all he knew. Forever surrounded by ice mirrors that reflected the world and somehow made him less than he already was. Pitiful child. Of the demon of the bloody mist he did not care, not what he was and not what he represented. He did not care about power and leaders and dreams and duties and choices, did not care even if he once did. Did not care, and even if he did it wasn't enough, everything he'd once wanted was single-minded ferocity. Haku was different. Mirror image Haku forever trapped in a cage of his own power, no choice, no future, no destiny, no goal but to live for another. Ha didn't know how long he sat next to those graves, gave no thought to the passing of stars and moons and suns, even if they only burned under his skin. This is how it begins. Eventually he decided. He did not want to live from rage, this future he rejected. Those that suckled bitterness knew only how to rage, forever twisted caricatures of humanity for all their pretending. He'd lost too much to lose even that too. Even if he'd never had it to begin with. Eventually he stood, dressed in ill-fitting pants and a cloak that was mostly black but had once been bright with red clouds. Akatsuki was just another red dawn, nothing else, nothing more. He'd made it so. And then he walked toward the infamous mist. Haku would have understood. This is how he lived, supreme among heaven and hell. And it did not matter. He lived. Kirigakure always smells of the sea, the bitter icy scent invading every lung and breath. It rises from the ground and settles in every shadow. This is Kirigakure, village hidden in the mist. In a way, it was the kindest fate. There are homes in Kirigakure permanently stained rust-red bones, pale and grinning. And copper rust is muffled by sea-heavy air. In a way, it was the cruelest of all lots. Cry, cry, cry. No one has ever come. The heavens cry this, the winds whisper it. Kirigakure always smells of the sea. And for 2 decades there have been former Kirigakure shinobi venturing deep into the mainland, always knowing they are not home when earth and sky are clear and green and not right. But they know only the dead live in Kirigakure. Run and never stop, only death sleeps in childhood homes. Kirigakure is the sea. Kirigakure is storm and wind and vengeful days of tempest and days of miles and miles of silver bright oceans. Kirigakure is blood and silver. Kirigakure is dark and paranoia and murder and insanity. Kirigakure is lost and falling and crying under a kage that hasn't realized he's become just like the man he deposed 8 years ago. Kirigakure is doomed. Not enough, never enough, didn't you know? Blood is never bright enough to light the way. And Kirigakure is someone's home. Kirigakure was someone's home. Once upon a time, all the stories say, there lived a boy named Haku. A boy who carried a secret, and before he could be called an adult the boy would have lost everything and died many miles from mist-covered dunes. Are you here, Haku? He wonders. If I call, will you answer? Sometimes he forgets. Some mornings he wakes thinking he is 12, bright and determined and running to distant goals. Other morning he knows, he is 18 and he has loved the world and hated the world and is now too tired to be either. He has seen the eyes of creation and broken things precious. Mirrors and mirrors, silver glory that now lays shattered. Broken and unmade, he has tumbled too far to ever be whole. But one thing is true. Kirigakure has no idea what has come the day a scruffy blond man first sees the faint dawn shining through the mist. He is not here to save a nation or a land. He is not here to save glorified blood or bright ideals. He no longer quite believes in them. He does not know if he has the strength to believe in them anymore. But he is here. And he thinks, if nothing else, it is time to see if a butterfly's wings can really spawn a maelstrom. The first year was incidentally the most difficult, and by far the easiest. He hadn't recovered enough sanity to worry over much, and what lucidity he had extended only far enough to plan his next step. The first year he took up a plain-faced mask and proceeded to hunt down the bounties of missing means. Wind and flight. Silver swift and impersonal crimson. Lives ended under his hands and red hissed on hard-packed earth. He did not care. He hunted and followed and caught, and always made sure to never see Konoha. That was no longer his home. Save me, save me, save me, didn't you know? No one has ever heard you. Eventually a little more sanity crawled into his head, hesitant and well convinced of the futility of it all but willing to live in the shattered mirror of his mind all the same. The first year was abstract in design. He hunted and collected money and eventually bought his first property. Child. Take one step and then another, never sane and never lost, this is the way. The compound, because something that extensive could only be a compound, was once a clan house. Of course, that was before Civil War. After Civil War painted Kirigakure in decadent red and clan bloodlines became synonymous with the worst offense one could be born with. In the end it always came down to blood. Even Akatsuki had only ever seen red. Red is blood. Red is power. Red is legacy. In the never-ending flux of political struggle among the leaders of Kirigakure, it was simple to acquire the deeds of a compound not even the homeless wanted. A permit to open an orphanage was surprisingly easy and issued without a thought. After all, who wanted to risk taking the damaged byproduct of a land bleeding itself? Don't look. Don't look. Sorry. So sorry. Turn away, child, can't you see? The mist is bleeding as it is. Never once did he think he could not do what he wanted. It was not arrogance that gave him the certainty that he alone stood above every hell imaginable. That he had the power to take his every desire, even if he knew he no longer was sane enough to care. It rumbled within. Red fire and endless chasms, the world lived on and he knew the axis of calamity. In the midst of dust-coated halls and stained walls of what would become his home, Naruto utilized his most familiar jutsu. Bushins of every nature, Mizu, shadow, earth, cloud, sand, were summoned with enough hands to repair the compound. Their nature and diversity was such that though it was obvious he was not from Mizu, it could not be said with any certainty from just where he did originate from. The first year was the easiest. He knew once he finally opened the compound to the orphans of Mizu, Snow-soft Haku had always been alone, his headhunting days would end. He, an orphan himself, knew many ways to stretch a coin, but eventually even that would end. He needed a way to funnel a steady income to the orphanage. He'd already seen 2 so-called orphanages in Mizu with reed-thin children and bellies too unused to food to know the difference. The Mizukage had neither the funds nor the interest to worry about dying children with no use but to cry on the earth. Save me, save me, save me, save me. This was also remarkably easy to compensate for. Men made their fortune making / growing / selling what someone else wanted. But men also spend lifetimes learning all they needed to succeed. In this he was different. He had 1,000 hands, 1,000 minds, 1,000 hours to learn all he needed in the span of a day. And when he knew what he wanted, he had 1,000 helpers to give rise to 1,000 projects. His children, and even if he did not know them yet, or they him, they were already his, would know refuge. Haku would have smiled. Save me, save me. And when the doors opened and his hands stretched across the alleyways of Mizu, he knew he would have found Haku given the chance. The first year was the hardest in many ways. Too many children bitter and weary enough to know no stranger offered anything without a price. Children too scared to believe and too weak to live in anywhere but shadows. In some ways they were more broken than he, and perhaps they knew that as well, like having recognized when they followed him home. Save me, still they cried. The first year was the easiest. His hands were soft and silent as his mind stretched across Mizu and found the scarred children of the bloodline clans that had been turned away from every door. This was his promise to Haku. It was not to say he concentrated solely on these children, but it was by far easier to find them. He did not know what he was, having discarded what he had been, only that he simply was. His power was such that none could hide from him, least of all those given power of their own. It made those of a chakra-latent birthright easier to find in the shadows of Mizu. The first year was the easiest. Save me, they hoped in the darkest of shadows. Still here and not yet gone. This was the time before politics and attention, when he was just another idealist who didn't understand not all lives were meant to be saved. A fool that thought he could control wild needy children. An employer whose staff inquiries were turned away before they could be uttered, after all who would willingly take up the compound of one of the most infamous bloodline clans. The rumored Shinobi clan who served as the hands of one of the former Mizukages and credited for instigating the first in a series of civil wars. It was no surprise no one had contested his acquisition of the compound. The first year was the hardest. Save me, they raged. Not here but not yet gone. He'd been broken too recently to ever consider being whole once more. He knew he was mostly made of shards from a broken world. That is who he was. But it was also true he'd never been stingy with what was his, even if he knew he could scarcely afford to give away any more of himself. What did it matter anyway? It wasn't like he'd ever be whole again. He was still foolish. He gave himself away. It was perhaps because love was not something gutter children had ever been gifted freely that they understood the true value of what he gave them. Naruto loved them. Save me. It was also not to say his love was the end to their torment. This they taught them, there were millions of ways one could break. And because of this some of his rage left him. Twisted and torn. Caricatures of children and imitations of humanity. Never quite real. These children were shadow and glass, harsh and bright and loud and desperate. In a way, Kami being the only one that could have predicted it, he had been made for them to hold. And because they were broken and he loved them, he gave them what he could of himself. He became what they needed, and in his own foolish, fumbling way he was the shade that let their shadows live in the world. He loved them. So he became what they needed. He was the hated figure with firm hands to bitter children, the protector to the weak, the mother to babes in his arms, the father that held them through nightmares, the charm that banished tormentors, the master to those who only knew how to obey, the grandfather that should have been there when parents died, the priest that forgave sins of desperation, the brother who laughed along with stupid plots, the sister that took a yard of cloth and made the clothes beautiful enough to be able to return to school with pride, the squawking aunt that held down squirming shoulders as years of dirt were scrubbed off, the mischievous savior who would unexpectedly stuff a cookie in silent months just when childish minds began to fear it was a dream. He was this and much more. Save me? Here and here. Take a step and then another. In the first year he found many broken children. More often than not he brought bloodline children, many knowing and many more clueless to their heritage, and welcomed them. They were children, and not all had bright eyes, who were all that remained of the genetic manipulation of the human genome, his mind whispered to him. So many were already broken. Every face he saw himself, every pair of hateful eyes he found his twin. All that he was, made again and again in Child's eyes. So many would only ever be able to function as ninja, he realized, shattered spirits made for a shattered lifestyle. This is rage. Genji bit his arm the first time he brought him to the compound, half-wild and silver-sheen pupil marking his legacy. A malnourished boy already having lost an eye and 2 fingers in the name of blind justice and a rage that had never healed. In 3 years, soap and time will finally reveal the brilliant blonde hair of a boy, Genin, he cried, who pounded foreign Chunin hopeful, and the clear favorite, in a match to become a Chunin of Mizu. This is silence. Aiko is too when he finds her in a bin, for days abandoned and nearly gone. She is weak and terrified for a very long time afterwards, even when the memories have long since been forgotten. Her chubby hand will always be found in his, either the original or a bushin. It's a long time before they realize how strange it is for him to be always there when they need him. Her hand remains in his long after the chubbiness fades, and the elegant bones of a woman emerge. He is there when he teaches her how to cut patterns in cloth, and sew perfectly tiny stitches. This is fear. Mai is 13, nearly 14. She yells sometime in the 3 hours of their acquaintance, and bleeding as no child should. She is afraid and she is brave, and even if she cries she thinks it can be forgiven this one time. Mai is 13 and bleeding and a mother for all of 12 minutes before she dies. Mai is not 14 and not a child, and she only wishes she was also not jealous of the haven she saw in her own child's future. This is what it means to be forgotten. Dai doesn't know how old he is, doesn't know his family name, doesn't know the last time he ate, and only wishes he didn't know what his elder brother's back looked like when he finally became a mouth that could not be fed. It takes him 16 months to stop hoarding food under his bed and another 12 to finally believe his last meal won't be the last. This is what it means for harsh reality to bed a childhood. Yuriko is a happy child, bright in the shadow of her 2 elder siblings. She doesn't remember a mother or father, and only knows abstractly what it means when periodic flu epidemics sweep through Mizu. She doesn't remember the epidemic that took her parents nor 2 other siblings. She does remember the next epidemic to sweep the village and the weak coughs of her sister. She remembers feverish brows and blurry eyes, and most importantly sure hands and speckled blue and violet eyes that fed her sister water and poultices. She remembers fearful days spent in flux, and the bright clarity of waking to see her sister smiling down at her. She remembers asking the blue eyes to teach her. This is defiance. Kisho is proud. Proud of surviving, of taking, of being stronger. He is rebellious and destructive and selfish. He fights Naruto of the blue eyes and runs away 5 times in the 4 months. He is sick and shivering and spitting blood and so happy when Naruto finds him each time and brings him back. This is what it means to be alone. Matsamaru has spent a lifetime looking through forbidding windows, looking at faces, looking at hands, looking at children's satchels, looking at bored old men sipping tea, looking at giggling men with orange novels in hand. He has spent a lifetime looking and can't contain his joy the first time Blue Eyes sits him down and shows him the characters of his name. His looking will never end, but at least this time he can finally look and understand that secret code, language, Blue Eyes murmurs, kanji, that hides everything from him. This is what it means to be branded. Yutaka is more broken than most. Gills at the neck and faintly blue skin mark him more obvious than most. The fact that he survived long enough for Naruto of the blue eyes to find him is a miracle. But he is brilliant, as only child weapons are prophesied to be, so Naruto takes care to spend as much time as possible with him because he has learned from a lifetime of ending brilliant shinobi. Brilliance is nothing without a reflection to give to the world. These are the lives that are reborn, remade, recreated. They are heavy and tangled and dark with a past that will live in each of them. But they are his. Naruto has found his children. And he has come home. He remembers more every day. In the beginning he was as much a fumbling child as the orphans he welcomed into his halls. He only hid it better. It was one thing to say he would take all manner of strays, but it was another thing to know how to make them grow. But even the blind must sometimes take a leap of faith into the dark abyss. One step and then another. Eyes wide open, and what a terrifying unknown it really was. Still, a childhood of empty hands had already taught him 100 different ways to hurt a child. His shinobi year mates had then proceeded to show him 100 more ways to twist a child. He knew enough to know every wrong way a child could be broken. Rules and respect and unyielding demands. Molds of forbearers and inherited guilt. If he let himself think too deeply, he'd realize he was way over his head. So he didn't. He'd always been an expert in denying reality and building his own. So he knew. All the children who looked at him with wide and frightened eyes didn't need to know reality. They needed him to tell them it was all a nightmare. So he did. This is truth. This is now. Mizu is an endless storm, this is truth. Walls of brick and mortar are more than blood-stained legacy. In this now, they are refuge. Endless violet eyes flare undying blue once more. The woman came during false dawn when the sky was still dark and damp and the house silent. She was thin and pale and old with worry. In the different age she would have been pretty and light and weak because of an easy life. But she was strong as only a woman trapped could be strong. She was strong even if she would never believe it. She did not run away, and that was already more than he could say of himself. Please, she said, was all that she really could say when he opened the old servant's entrance to peer at her in the weak light. Please. Wordlessly he held his arms out, and the woman stepped forward, trembling with coming grief and exhaustion as she placed a ragged bundle in his arms. The babe swaddled in patched linens did not stir. Surprised for a moment, he kept an eye on the remaining bundle in her hands. I didn't know. She continued helplessly. Thin callous fingers hovered over newborn unmarred flesh, her touch ghosting over skin that would not remember this moment. I understand, he said, because he did, even if a part of him would hate her a little bit for this moment. But he was once a ninja and had been taught to hide such things long ago. Tightening his head slightly, blue eyes flickered across the empty street. I understand, please step inside for a moment. The woman paled even in the dim light. I'll be missed soon. I have to go. Blue eyes settled on the thin woman. This is the last thing the child will require of you. She flinched. Children, she murmured as she stepped lightly inside, nervous gait that of a wild animal, as she held up the bundle in her arms. I'm sorry, I'm so sorry. My poor babies. In the shadow of an old tree, half encroaching in what used to be the servant's walk, he sat on a raised root. The baby in his arms mewed softly before settling into his warmth. He had always been warmer to the touch than normal. The woman remained standing, both hands now cradling her remaining bundle. Tell me what I will tell them. Tell me the reason so they may understand why. His voice remained calm and commanding, expectant. He knew already what would come of this. The woman would leave the two babies in his arms. He would raise them in his house and he would love them. And as they grew they would be hurt and resentful, and perhaps they would hate the woman before him, but they would never know her. She in turn would go home, weak excuses on her lips and a mother's grief never ending. In years' time she will sometimes walk past his house, desperate eyes searching every child's face for her own. But for now. Weary eyes gazed at the child in her hands. I didn't know. I didn't. My mother, she was alone. She suspected he, my father, was from a bloodline, but she didn't have a choice. I'm like my mother, but my babies. They're starting to say we've been cursed. Everyone who comes near my poor babies gets weak and sick. My mother, she's dying. She took care of my babies the longest and now she's so weak. I don't know how, but my poor babies are doing this. They are bloodline born, she whispered harshly, brokenly. The worst sin a child could be born with. They'll kill them. They'll kill them. I can't save anyone. He held up his free arm for the other child. Gently she settled the child in his arms. At last, kneeling before him, she touched their foreheads in one last blessing. There are rumors I've heard that this place would help them. Blue eyes gazed at her for the last time before they turned to face the sleeping children. I understand. Leave this place, woman, and forget what happened today. Your children sickened with the same illness that has your mother. She will recover. They were too young to survive. He did not look as her eyes became bloodshot and tormented. Yes, can you tell me your name? Hesitantly she reached for his arm, her touch almost fearful. 7 more children, all with her brown eyes. 2 dead before their 3rd birthday. 3 belong to her husband, but 2 are products of harsh years when she will sell her body. She will seek his doorstep twice more. Her touch withdrew. He did not look at her. Instead, one of the sleeping twins stirred quietly and opened soft brown eyes. I am Awatsuki. The Blue Dawn. He continued gazing at the curious child even as his twin joined him in his study. Quietly the woman retreated, soft hands unlatching the servant's entrance and disappearing into the early dawn. Alone save for the twins, he drew them closer to himself. Poor babies, you were so hungry, weren't you? fumbling chakra strings winded around his arms, gently sucking at his chakra. No one had enough chakra to feed you. The babies gurgled softly as an unnamed hunger finally settled within themselves. They were born with the ability to feed on enemy chakra, genetically altered to train their responses from the womb. Years ago they would have been welcomed into a bloodline clan, born to shinobi parents that knew enough to feed them with their excess chakra. Instead they appeared after a generation in the family of a civilian woman, her untrained chakra too weak to feed babies that were starving without her knowledge. Now what shall I name you to? Brown eyes never left endless blue. Welcome to the Awatsuki house, little ones. I am Awatsuki Naruto. Welcome Ryutsuki Sito and Ryutsuki Seiki. Brown eyes closed softly. The Ryutsuki twins were not the first children left on his doorstep, though they were the only ones whose mother attempted to explain. But from the moment he holds the babies he understands something new. There are no good choices. There are only bad and worse choices. And in the end Sito and Seiki are lucky enough to end up with the lesser evil. He is not their father, but he is all they will ever know as such. The world is turning and it is no longer completely in danger of ending. A year passes, marked only by the sound of children laughing and flying dust as abandoned halls come to life once more. The next comes with equal calm, interrupted only once when their modest greenhouse is expanded into a massive structure. Frugally used, the money earned during his headhunting days still supports the orphanage, but he had never been one to indulge in complacency. The compound's old greenhouse is used to grow vegetables and herbs meant to supplement their diet. The new greenhouse is meant for something entirely different. A little more of the world settles. Grown now and watched over by a slew of orphans were medicinal and poisonous herbs. Poison was sometimes the only remedy. The years had played havoc with Mizu's civilian population, and where once they had readily supplied Mizu proper with what it needed, now it wasn't uncommon to have the supply chain from outskirt villages interrupted every once in a while as one skirmish or another broke out. In their third year, he carefully guides some of the older orphans on how to properly harvest their crop. The west side of the compound would always smell strongly of herbs. It is a scent more than one new resident learns to link with Awatsuki house. The fourth year is another first. He leads Sweet Yuriko, Kisho, and Isa in the making of poultices. Mizu's Central Hospital is destroyed in the beginning of the year, and the small clinics that spring up don't have the supply chains needed to service even half of their patients. The Mizukage half-heartedly attempts to re-establish the hospital but ultimately settles for providing private medics for his own forces and letting the civilian population filter where they may. That year medic needs and doctors reacquaint themselves with the more traditional remedies the Awatsuki house supplies. He says nothing when he hears the news. He sees more now than ever before, of what once was, is, and could one day be. Calamity is still within reach. That year he builds a small forge and teaches some of his more adept charges how to mold fire and metal into everything from construction nails to farming tools. He ignores requests for shinobi equipment from 2 of the iron shops that distribute his wares. A few months later 3 blacksmith and an apprentice die as another skirmish erupts. This time the only explanation given involves market territory, ninja politics, and an unlucky kunoichi. This warring time will not end soon. He says nothing. The 5th year marks the first turning point. Somehow or another the Awatsuki house has stayed financed, has managed to steadily grow, and most of all has carved a future he hadn't been able to see in the begging. The oldest orphan is a 21-year-old Mieko, one of his first strays, trained by him as a seamstress and willing to stay on. There are a few more in that age group, boys and girls trained in everything from seamstressing to forging to pharmacists, but it is 12 and 11-year-old rookie Chunin, Genji and Yutaka, that represent Awatsuki's largest link to the outside world. It has never been a secret that Awatsuki house bloodline children. While there are several dozen genin on active duty and many more in the Shinobi Academy, it is no surprise that genius Yutaka and surprising contender Genji are being watched by Mizu's many warring circles. They are young and powerful, orphans with no strong established allegiances, and backed by the mysterious Awatsuki house. In the wake of it all, Awatsuki house continues to quietly prosper. They were an odd place. Uneasy neighbors sneered and looked away, and thankfully children did not incite the revulsion needed to torch the place. Not yet anyway. Mizu's politics forever shift, waged with words and occasionally force. Mizu, for all that it is one of the 5 great hidden villages, doesn't even have the pretense of a united shinobi force. The academy is unsurprisingly a showcase for the warring factions, unaffiliated shinobi in training courted with promises of power and training. And in the midst of it all sit his orphan children. It takes no great leap to track other young shinobi back to Awatsuki. Mizu's warning factions are used to clans and families producing generations of their ilk. They do not know what to do with an orphanage doing the same. Mizu State Orphanage, the largest of its kind, has a reputation for producing most of the women in the Red Lights district. They know nothing of what Awatsuki House is. They know even less of the single man that runs it, Awatsuki Naruto. But it is until the 10th year, after years of frustration for all the widely contracted shinobi assigned to watch Awatsuki, that things begin to change. After all, despite the nearly 100 solid clones, and Kami only knows the chakra needed for that feat, intelligence reports remain awkwardly sparse. And while the mystery that surrounded the director of Awatsuki House had been its own protection against outside encroachment, it was no longer enough. Despite every misgiving, Awatsuki House, an orphanage of all things, had become powerful. That was the most dangerous asset to posses. Change is coming. In the beginning of the year, a scantily veiled girl leaves a 3-year-old infant next to the old servant's entrance. Third-year academy students, twins Sito and Seiki, were only the first whose guardian rang the backdoor bell and whose mother actually stayed behind to personally hand over the child. Every few months the event would repeat itself, the heavy door sometimes revealing babes still clutching their umbilical cord, but other times giving older children, trembling hands firmly clasping that of younger siblings. It took a stronger child to ignore the terror they'd been fostered with for bloodline children. But even if they could not feel entirely easy, whispered stories had plenty of impact. The year previously, 3 scribes, an apprentice pharmacist, a glassmaker, and 2 carpenters settled in shops around Mizu. In the same amount of time, 4 new whores left the state orphanage, and a score of inscrubbers turned smugglers emerged from the state orphanage. It took time, expertise, and materials to train apprentices. Neither state orphanage had the funds for such a wide-scale operation or the people to implement it with. After the first year, it was no secret within Awatsuki House that Father Awatsuki, as some of his wards called him, through a large amount of solid clones, was able to single-handedly keep an eye on all the house's charges, and because of those clones had the hands to do everything needed. Like vultures, warring parties watched Awatsuki. Such a lovely place. With greedy eyes wide open, look into blue, and dream that conquest is possible. It was under that tightening net that one day he opened the back door to find the abandoned 5-year-old child, his mother having fled as fast as she could. Thin arms held themselves up in a silent wish to be held, and obligingly his unloved hands reached for the child. Strong arms held the curious boy. Strength and hidden compassion marked watchful bright green eyes. Unseen hands settling ceremonial robes on strong shoulders. Bowed heads and fists against hearts. Mizukage! Hands retreated into voluminous sleeves. My dear little boy, what manner of Mizukage will you be? Green eyes blinked. Aozaki Inari. The child smiled at him. He did not say anything more, not to anyone with interest in someone with the fortitude to be Kage, or even to the child himself. So long as Awatsuki House remained undisturbed, he was content to let things be. And perhaps that is his most foolish dream, because that year is also the year the reigning Mizukage called him for an audience, and he in turn met the young Indu Seiji. He could no longer afford to say nothing. Master Awatsuki? The blonde-haired young man stilled for a moment, head tightening in an odd moment that was too graceful and too primal to settle easily in the eyes of those watching. Yes? Master Awatsuki, I have some matters to discuss with you. Permitting your leisure, may I call upon your hospitality this Sunday? The man speaking smiled an altogether polite and bland smile, friendly without being comfortable. The blonde man did not bother to hide pursed lips. 2 hours past noon, mister? Indu Seiji. Naruto gave an equally bland smile back. He said nothing more, gave nothing away, and simply quietly waited till Indu shifted in a manner he hadn't learned to hide yet. They parted with one more nod. Shrugging off the encounter, Naruto simply returns to his inspection of bolts of cloth. This year 8 of his children would be entering into the academy. And all 8 children would need to be appropriately attired. Years of financial planning have taught him the wisdom of manufacturing as much as possible within his house. And even as a child, Naruto had known shinobi gear was painfully expensive. Poverty may have made him skimp on his own equipment, excusable in retrospect. His body was built to ignore damage, but he wasn't about to make the same allowances for his own children. So this is why he found himself weighing 2 nearly identical spools of wire thread. Properly woven and molded, the wire thread would become the protective mesh meant to reinforce shinobi attire. Although he found the particular task mind-numbing, luckily one of his older boys, Jun, was interested in the intricacies of shinobi wear. Naruto was not above fobbing the task on someone else. With a final nod, Naruto signaled the vendor. Blue eyes carefully watched as the man charged him the amount ticketed. His face remained impassive before bowing slightly and parting. A marked difference from the first time he had bought wire thread. Things were changing. The years had been kind in a way. Tensions between the warring factions had settled somewhat in the last years, never entirely fading, and in their way the villagers of Mizu had relented toward Awatsuki. While not entirely easy with the existence of bloodline children, the fact that they were clearly orphans tempered their xenophobia. For all the history associated with bloodline, the truth remained that Awatsuki's orphans were clanless and alone. They were being reared by a man who, though eccentric, was single-handedly doing the most to rebuild Mizu's middle class. The villagers, at least any who had spent nights suffering over chronic supply shortages or watching someone die because there were either no medics or no one skilled in using them, recognized the small trickle of civilians leaving Awatsuki every year, and only predicted to increase with time. Awatsuki, despite sealing itself off from large-scale interactions, a fact the villagers were not quite shameful enough to regret, at least not yet, never made an effort to hide itself. It did as it said. It was an orphanage dedicated to imparting an education on its wards. And there was a sort of relief to be found in knowing where the bloodline children resided. There had always been a fear among different parties that children were quietly shuffled behind compound walls and trained as personal clan soldiers. It was a strategy commonly practiced as everyone was marked to find out over the conflict-strewn years. And while Awatsuki House represented its own sort of danger, a consolidation of loose power, in the end it was the lesser of two evils. It is a balance Naruto predicted 10 years ago, and has carefully guided at all times. It was also a precarious line to keep. Internally, Awatsuki finally stabilized in the 8th year enough so external forces could no longer ignore the possibility of the house's impact on Mizu's politics. He gained 2 more years as Mizu's various intelligence units tried to make sense of Awatsuki Naruto, the man, the motives, and even the hidden history. Not that they gained anything new. Some names do not survive their light. Not when there is too much weight, anger, guilt, hate, in their memory. Believe it! Mizu lives in the now. And it wants to know who this foreigner in its midst really is. But he has learned not to give things for free. He has and will use every skill and secret to preserve in his adopted land. It is balance. 10 years come and gone, and he could no longer hide behind his gated compound. Unlike the Sandaime Hokage's easy comradeship with his subordinates, the Rokudaime Mizukage, and because of usurpation and subsequent creative historic doctoring, also the second man to hold the exact title, was an entirely different creature. There was no softness in his features, no air of invitation. Naruto, for all that he bowed as custom dictated to the very same man, personally thought the Rokudaime had good reason to avoid face-to-face meetings, and not just because of the very real likelihood of assassination. He simply did not have the charisma to court anyone's vanity. From his raised dais, the Mizukage surveyed the wiry blonde in front of him. And a small part of Naruto snorted in derision, the part that remembered a Hokage worked behind a desk for his village and did not tower over his village. 10 years later and memories were becoming easier to bear. For his part, the Mizukage was distinctly unimpressed with the boy intelligence reports had flagged as a growing entity. While his coloring was just on the normal side of exotic for Mizu, it wasn't anything more outlandish than half the shinobi forces. He was thin and of average height, entirely unarmed if his guards were to be believed, and in the 3 hours he'd been made to wait his agents had clandestinely gathered nothing save the fact the man was patient and prone to using manners as a smokescreen. A very large part of the Mizukage just wanted to outright dismiss the man as a weak-willed civilian, another useless bleater that crawled all over Mizu and had no other use but to annoy him. But he didn't. Even if he was inclined to, he couldn't ignore the man's activities. 7 years now shinobi students sprang from Awatsuki, and although genin were still genin, Mizu was trained in spotting those with strength. The urge to consider the man harmless was completely stifled as soon as Awatsuki was led to his audience, eyes down and hands demure. Standing between his A and B guards, ever present and always masked, the man, despite all signs pointing to the contrary, managed not to be overshadowed by his more intimating surroundings. It takes a special sort of man to stand without posturing. They say those most ignorant are often in the position of making wisest observations. Fools and children speak the truth. So it was that the Mizukage, ignorant as he was of what made the man before him truly special, made an observation, one which only a few had noted and oftentimes never took into account the full implications of it. The blond man, for all his picturesque meekness, had a dangerous charisma. There was an invitation in blue-violet eyes, a directness and expectation, that made the Mizukage, raised on his dais and robed ceremonially, feel as if he was meeting an equal. And while it was subtly insulting for men of their distinct stature, the Mizukage was perspective enough to image how Awatsuki could inspire Mizu's beggars and curs to reach out for whatever lay hidden behind those blue-violet eyes. All he needed now was to figure out why such a promising man was an orphanage director of all things. Mizukage-sama, Awatsuki Naruto, one of the faceless guards murmured, stepping back to his regular position against the wall. Awatsuki. The Mizukage finally acknowledged when it became clear that the man did not feel the nervous pressure to begin filling up the silence. We have been reviewing your records. You are not a native of Mizu. And there lay the most perplexing truth, for only a native of Mizu would be tenacious enough to willingly cling to it in spite of political tensions that never retreated. But it was to Naruto's credit as well, and he knew it. Native or not, 10 years after the fact was a little too late to be raising concerns, least of all by a Mizukage that was chained by the fear he would upset the delicate balance that had ruled Mizu's peace for the last few years. That is true, Mizukage-sama. You were issued the deeds to what is now the Awatsuki House by the governing council of Mizu during the 3rd year of the Ogatsuruga conflict. Naruto smiled politely and nodded. It was his luck that he managed that concession during a 3-year silent civil war during which there was no clear candidate for Mizukage after the assassination of the last one. The governing council merely reflected widespread politics and remained too conflicted to effectively worm any concession from him. It would have been an entirely different situation if he'd had to beseech one single man with one single ambition. Ignoring those still attending the Shinobi Academy, Awatsuki has managed to produce 5 Jounin, 25 Chunin, and 69 Genin. 68 Genin, Naruto corrected. Reiko Takagi died this morning from damage sustained a week ago. The Mizukage paused but did not comment. That makes nearly 100 Mizu shinobi. Nearly 100 of my soldiers affiliated with a man this village knows very little about. It would be very inconvenient to place the loyalties of those serving me in doubt simply because it was their fortune to be housed by a foreigner. A part of Naruto, the part of his most resonate to his insolent younger self, wanted to call the man an idiot for questioning his own shinobi. But time had bred patience and a certain appreciation for fighting and fooling and hiding with words alone. That part of his spirit remained. But there was also a part of Naruto that remained broken. Something of his humanity never recovered when he was shattered. The Mizukage did not know enough not to tempt calamity. I would hope I have done nothing to raise concerns. That remains to be seen. What I remain curious about is why a shinobi with your obvious chakra capacity is reduced to being a caretaker. I do not find myself unsatisfied with my occupation, Mizukage, and while I make it no secret that I did receive some training at one point, I am neither a shinobi nor do I ever want to be known as such. If I can explain? Naruto never paused, keeping his words firmly embedded in the truth, even as he enthusiastically deceived. I have been an orphan since birth, and while I managed to receive training, I have never qualified to even be a genin. My large chakra capacity gave me no control, and my early training was designed for a more average chakra level. There have never been any adults interested in what that would mean if I should have ever risen within shinobi ranks. And while I know better now, I'm too bitter to rewrite history. I am not a shinobi. I have never had anyone to guide me when I was still young enough to want it. I am not a native of Mizu, but Mizu is not the only places where conflict leaves victims that can't be helped. There isn't much I can do in this world without resorting to something that will cost me my sanity, but what I've done, what I've built, that holds a lifetime satisfaction. The Mizukage studied Naruto, trained eyes classifying every motion as an involuntary betrayal of his true state of mind. But Naruto had also been a shinobi and knew better than to lie. Everything he'd said, everything he'd alluded to was truth. But very little of his truth revealed a true picture of his past. The Mizukage pursed his lips, clearly guessing some of Naruto's strategy. I'm sure if I ordered my intelligence and torture division agents to take you in, you would be a lot more helpful. Naruto continued to smile, that gentle smile that Sandai must have practiced half his life to drive his supplicants up the wall. Yes, I imagine you could. Nobody, not even the Mizukage, moved. The placid expression on Naruto's face was all too reminiscent of the same countenance worn by broken shinobi, right before they started killing everyone in their path. Zabuza Momochi was only one Mizu shinobi that painted the ground red. And finally Naruto's smile morphed into something more real. His smile became sharper and colder, eyes uncrinkling enough so that the darkening violet eyes were not hidden. There was no killing intent released, but then again it was unnecessary given the tension in the room. But the fact remains, what will you gain when I lose? For all that Awatsuki House is an orphanage, it has already produced nearly 100 shinobi, and will produce more every year. When you break my orphanage, when you destroy me, can you ever be sure that those very same shinobi won't go after you for destroying what might be the only home, the only father, they've ever known? And if you do order my children killed, can you be sure the slaughter of Mizu's forces won't spark our next civil war? Are you confident enough in your power, in your enemies, in your allies, that you will survive? So again, what will you gain when I lose? To his credit, the only sign that betrayed the Mizukage was a light flush from what might have been a temper in younger days. You're very confident. Naruto's eyes were hidden away as they crinkled back into his sandaime smile. No, not really. But what I can do does not wholly depend on myself. Whether I walk out of here or not, that is not something I should fret overmuch on, is it? Nothing else was said between both men, Naruto unwilling to tempt fate by either being too much of a braggart or issuing incendiary threats, and the Mizukage still too cautious. Because the interview did not go as the Mizukage predicted. Awatsuki was not a simple civilian, hampered by bonds and obligations. He was not a man too afraid of death, either his own or that of his so-called children. The man that came before him was ruthless as only experienced leaders were, willing to die, willing to sacrifice. Willing to do anything if it meant continuation, not of themselves but what they represented. Even as Awatsuki walked out, the Mizukage was horribly reminded of just whose back he was watching. Every faceless clan leader, backed by blood and loyalty, that circled his throne, now walked away from him once again. Awatsuki had formed his clan right under Mizu's very nose. Any hope of crushing Awatsuki quietly in the night faded at that moment. Awatsuki Naruto had won. And no one had realized it early enough to even fight against his wave. Outside of hidden villages, shinobi make up a small amount of the overall population. Even within those hidden villages, those that make it past basic training, imparted either through academy-style learning or private apprenticeships, a further half never make it to genin or above. It isn't intelligence or physical strength that set the bar, though possessing either certainly helps. It takes a different kind of mind and skills to begin training from early childhood in order to enter a profession that is guaranteed to make you an equally young corpse if you are simply not fast enough. In retrospect, there is a reason why the greatest shinobi are spawned from the most dysfunctional of situations. Duties, guilts, persecutions, love, generations of men and women had risen on the backs of those ghosts. It was no surprise that Awatsuki House was ideally suited to the task of producing driven shinobi. But even then, it was also clear that not everyone that had the reason to be a shinobi had the spirit. Haku, for all his brilliance, had always been too gentle. Some had seen enough darkness in the world to find no reason, not even anger at the injustice, enough to tempt them into a shinobi's life. Early on, when Awatsuki was still half a dream and a patchwork of reality, Naruto had known better than to tempt the populace by sending his children to the local state-run primary school. The Ogatsuruga conflict had just been ending and gossip was alive with the news that Oga's last stand involved programmed orphan bloodline children. Instead, he'd done what he'd always done best, forged a solution with a liberal amount of solid clones. He would teach them. Naruto had been educated in his youth, and what he did not know was not impossible to find out. By the time the outside world would be interested in the goings-on of Awatsuki's inner sanctum, more than one person would be left stunned. The younger years, those children not even Naruto could in good conscience allow to begin learning a trade, were assigned to a Naruto-created and taught primary school or in even younger cases the nursery. The energetic shrimps were corralled and forcibly taught using a revival of Irika-sensei's force of personality. The older children, those opting out of the academy or failed students, were given lessons in the early morning and then sent off with one of a multitude of clones to complete some odd chore that would eventually set the foundations for a trade. For all his early fumbling in this system, Naruto wasn't all that worried. Even useful tradesmen were better than none. The last 3 civil wars had practically gutted 2 generations of Mizu's middle class. Mizu as such was disappropriately composed of clan and family wealth cloistered in their compounds, and the very poor that had no hope of advancement. There were still apprenticeships into trades, but too many skilled men and women had died in the conflicts, and with them their livelihood. It made what Naruto was doing all that more unusual. "Eyes front, children!" Naruto yelled, voice a near-perfect mimicry of Irika at his most relentless. Nearly 30 students shifted to look at the blond man, a wide range of faces aged anywhere between 14 and 19 years old. They weren't the only orphans in that age range, but they were the ones Naruto felt would be needed for his next project. "Noriaki will be passing out folders to your particular group leaders. Rikiya and Toshiro and their kids have already drafted the plans for our next project. Junichi, you'll be managing this project. A caravan to one of the inland villages is scheduled to leave Mizu in 3 days. Whoever you take with you will be traveling with one of our accountants. Megumi is free, and I'm sure you can bargain down enough to make me proud." Megumi certainly can. Someone muttered. Scary lady? Naruto merely grinned his approval. I've hired a genin team to escort you to and from. Once the team is back with supplies, Kosuke will be overseeing construction. For those of you who know even less than your much hated sensei. You're not that hated, sensei. How kind. Anyway, we will be building a ramen cart for Koji and Tomoko. On cue, the older students let out sharp whistles. Koji and Tomoko were in their early 20s and some of Naruto's earliest wards. They were also first trained in the food industry by working and feeding a multitude of snot-nosed kids from Awatsuki's kitchens and were later sent to work at a ramen restaurant in one of the outlying villages. Naruto was still leery about attracting too much notice within Mizu proper. The culmination of their training was the final step in the system slowly being institutionalized within Awatsuki itself. Older trainees were ultimately sent out to real establishments for their final apprenticeships. Luckily, Koji and Tomoko's apprenticeships were one of the easiest acquisitions he ever had to make. Usually it involved an unnamed monetary quantity, and in some cases schooling within Awatsuki's primary school for outside children. Naruto had always managed to bond with ramen owners due to either a byproduct of his youth or something instinctive that let everyone know Naruto and ramen were indecently acquainted. His former ward's situation was even sweeter because of how ridiculously in love both Koji and Tomoko were. Normally a ramen stand would either be the product of several years' work or come about as an inherited acquisition. Koji and Tomoko would be bypassing that entirely. Instead, their stand would come as a loan from Awatsuki House, to be paid through set monthly amounts. The only reason it was at all possible was because Naruto had the means to cheaply acquire the raw materials from outside Mizu and had the knowledge, already passed on to children he was training, to bring the project about. Unfortunately, the stove will have to be bought, but all other utensils will be using pottery instead of metal, will be produced by Mitsuaki and those working at the kiln. Akari, if you could sew the canopy? Remember, it doesn't hurt to ask if you need help. It will hurt if I find you've been screwing around. Dismissed. His children began rising from their seats, some scrambling and some lagging, as Naruto fluttered about hugging as many awkward limbs as he could reach, and he was fast enough to reach a good deal. Naruto had always privately maintained uptightness, and his childhood was filled with a whole slew of them, had really needed a hug. He'd managed to put his theory to practice from very early on. Nearly everyone had run off when Naruto finally turned his attention to two girls waiting at his elbow. Now what can I do for you, my dears? Karen smiled before abruptly stepping forward and fiercely hugging Naruto. The older blonde didn't say anything, merely returning the hug just as strongly. He waited patiently till Karen finally turned her head enough to speak. Thank you, sensei. For doing this for Tomoko-ne and for letting me help. Anything for my children, was all Naruto quietly said. He understood what Karen was trying to say. While neither Tomoko nor Karen were blood-related, the older girl had been as much mother to Karen as Naruto had been a father to them both. And to orphans such bonds were all the more precious because while they were not born with any obligation to care for the other, they'd willingly chosen to form a bond. Thank you, sensei. Karen repeated again, her best friend smiling widely at them from her position. Of you go, you've work to do. See you later, sensei. His children are growing. And there is no greater wonder. Induseiji is the final milestone that brands that 10th year. When he finally comes that fated Sunday, he is led into Awatsuki's tea room by Sayako, her impeccable mannerisms better set against a high-class house than an orphanage. The girl had been trained as his housekeeper, using every formal uptight manner imparted from shinobi lessons designed for infiltration, and would soon be leaving to be a personal maid to some rich young lady in the capital of Mizu no Kuni. Naturally Indu, trained as a shinobi, the rumored heir to the Indu clan, and as one of his wards said, a skilled jounin, noticed the inconsistency. I wasn't aware an orphanage could afford to employ such a servant. Naruto gave his sandame smile, indulgent and open. My girl is not a servant of Awatsuki. She will be leaving soon for her new employment in the capital. Indu sighed. You have done very well for yourself. I hardly recognized this compound from what it looked like under the Hashigaki clan. Naruto smiled and gave his thanks. Neither mentioned that it was the Indu clan who engineered Hashigaki's downfall. The only survivor, to their knowledge, was Hashigaki Kisame, and only because he had defected from both his clan and village years ago. Of course, only Naruto knew where those bones were buried. A clan and an orphanage really do serve distinct purposes. I hope you don't mind if I indulge in gossip, but I heard the Mizukage was considering giving you governing control over the state orphanages. While I cannot say what the Mizukage may be thinking, I can say that no one has said anything about that to me. The state orphanages are institutionalized as an offshoot of the Mizuki's office. I doubt it will be easy or even beneficial for control to be transferred from the military to civilian hands. I suppose. Both quietly drank their tea and didn't mention all that Naruto had implied. He would not take a post within Mizu's forces, even if it should be nothing more than an administrator. His seemingly soft humanitarian visage would not bend to the prospect of helping even more bleeding children if it meant tangling with the military. But I am sure you have been considering expansion. I doubt you'll be able to acquisition property of this size again, and Awatsuki House must be reaching full capacity if it hasn't already. Naruto chuckled, the motion a full mimicry of the Sandaime. He needed the former Hokage's calm when all he felt like doing was beating Indu silly for even sniffing around his house, his children. You've done your homework. My house will be approaching full capacity soon enough, and like you say, another compound this size will be hard to acquire. A fact that wasn't all due to the money involved. More than one party was wary of allowing Awatsuki to expand unheeded or unquarreled to them. For the time we'll manage. Needs must, I suppose? Inda shrugged. I think you have the most fascinating use of solid clones I've ever seen. If the shinobi nations were of a more peaceful nature, I image this as what peacetime use of jutsus would look like. Something truer crept into his Sandaime's smile and hidden eyes. It's not the first time I've heard that sentiment. But to bring peace to the elemental nations? That can only be done with power. Not something anyone will easily manage. For the first time, something of Indu's true personality shone through, and not just the facade of diplomacy from an information-gathering clan heir. Do you believe that's at all possible? This time it was Naruto's turn to shrug. Someone once told me, everyone feels pain the same. You are working for your justice and I for mine. But if revenge is called justice, then that justice breeds more revenge and becomes a chain of hatred. We cannot help but know that people can never understand each other. The world of ninja is ruled by hatred. So how do you find a way to bring peace? Even if people manage to understand the source of hatred, it does not mean they can forgive. Shinobi are not creatures of peace, Indu finally said, because he couldn't really answer anything else. He'd already seen too much as a shinobi himself. Naruto gave Indu a wry smile. For all that Naruto's face remained remarkably free of the passage of age, Indu was actually younger than Naruto by 3 or 4 years. It doesn't mean shinobi are not also humans, and humans have a tendency to dream of peace. I can finally see why you aren't a shinobi, Indu finished somewhat regretfully. Just imagining the ingenuity needed to build Awatsuki House coupled with the enormous chakra the blonde man possessed was a clear indication that Naruto had all the potential of becoming one of those legendary ninjas. And not just a legend because he was ruthless enough to murder any number of people, but because there was something great about the blonde man. So if you have no interest in being a shinobi, and you really do have such a depressing view on the whole system, then why in the world are you allowing so many of your wards to enter the system? Just because I cannot change the world does not mean my wards cannot do any better. I try and teach them what I've learned before I send them to the academy. I hope they are a little wiser in what they do with their power. Because change can only be done with power? Indu repeated. Yes. I hope that I do not make the mistake of letting my children inherit all of their predecessors' mistakes. You cannot change the fact that children inherit the world their predecessors build. That is the order of things. And because they must take this world as we leave, must they also live with our mistakes. The only fate we are born with is the one we accept. A pretty notion, but how true is it in practice? Naruto titled his head, hands lifting to encompass the air around him. My house offers my children an opportunity, but in the end it is their personal effort that changes their fate. There is only so much I can do. But that's not an exactly fair comparison. If it wasn't for you, those children would have no chance at changing their fate. They would have had to accept what they were born with. Perhaps, perhaps not. But that chance, that fate, that is a result of my power. My power cannot change the world, cannot bring about peace to the elemental nations, but it can change the lives of those I choose to take in. I can only hope something good comes about the change brought about by the power my children will eventually gain. Indu contemplated his empty teacup for a moment before throwing back his head and laughing. I really don't know how we got so distracted. It is a pleasure talking to you, Awatsuki-san. I haven't met many who indulge this freely in healthy debate. Naruto smiled freely, letting blue eyes shine, before he let his smile fade back into his Sandaime facade. I think we could have been friends. The easy comradness of the moment faded abruptly, leaving Indu visibly tense at the transition. Oh? And what makes you think we can't be friends? I would have thought you would have no objections to my company. No sign of discomfort appeared on the blond man's face. Let me correct myself then. I think Seiji and I would have been friends, and while I find you someone I no doubt would enjoy a healthy debate with, our circumstances do not allow it. You are Indu and your clan is the leader of one of the Mizuki's main detracting factions. Friendship between us would indelibly involve Awatsuki and Indu in the struggle. I'm sure you can guess how much I disapprove of the idea. Indu quickly composed himself, letting the affable man disappear in favor of Indu's clan heir. Another pretty notion. How much longer do you really think Mizu's factions are content to ignore Awatsuki and the very pretty resource it represents? You would need allies to just keep afloat. Blue eyes darkened slightly, and under the indoor light, Indu could almost swear Awatsuki's eyes shinned with something feral. An ally Indu would no doubt considering becoming for the right price. Naruto was quick to dismiss. So you mean to go it alone? Indu wondered. The notion, while odd, would have been something he would have dismissed completely if he never met the man behind it all. Seeing him, talking to him, Indu was startled to find he was starting to believe Awatsuki Naruto could navigate Mizu's political waters well enough to succeed by himself. Is that a gamble you think you can win? And Naruto finally gave him a completely true smile, sharp and wild. I don't gamble for a reason. It's no fun if you always win. Despite himself, Indu smiled. If you really mean to do as you say, I will tell you this. The Indu clan will not move against you, but we will not help you either. Your fate is what you make of it. Thank you? Naruto said, reading something in Indu the younger man wasn't even aware he was betraying. I know there will be a time when physical force will be required. I have no intention of using my wards as my own soldiers. I have no intention of involving my house in politics. When they come, I'll just make sure my rejection is loud enough for all of Mizu to hear. Indu bowed slightly. I wish you all the luck. Naruto did not move to stand as Indu was led out by Sayako. He remained gazing at his cold tea long after the man had left his property. The Axis of Calamity smiled. It came fast, a feeling as fierce as the tides that came with the moon. The feeling had been there for a while. But out of the ordinary, things rarely made themselves known clearly, so for a while all he had was a feeling. Something was changing. A nameless, almost unobtrusive anxiety settled deep in his gut. It was an ache that had nothing to do with his hunger, or the nearing confrontation with one of Mizu's more foolish factions. They would have to be foolish to strike with so little intelligence on him. It remained with him even as he immersed himself in other matters. In the days following his first talk with the heir of the Indu clan, Indu Seiji, Naruto never made known the contents of their discussion, though he was watched a tad more in anticipation for the expected results. But the results were anything but expected. A simple civilian orphanage director with at most 5 Jounin-level shinobi at his call should have folded under the first outside political push. It was the way of Mizu, where everything with a trace of power was corralled to something more powerful. The obvious did not happen. Indu clan made no effort to link itself, physically or politically, to Awatsuki. There were neither the obligatory Indu shinobi patrolling the Awatsuki compound nor offers of training to the Awatsuki orphans. There were no backdoor deals or hidden motives. It was simple. So simple it took the better part of a month for anyone to say so with any modicum of certainty. The Indu clan and the Awatsuki house remained unaffiliated. For one reason or another, the Indu clan, which never made secret its ambitions, willingly turned away from the lucrative prize that was Awatsuki. Older and wiser watchers concluded Indu was merely waiting till Awatsuki was made submissive by the costly efforts of a third party before swallowing it up. In truth, that was not an altogether inadvisable strategy. While common sense dictated it was more costly to engage an established armed faction instead of an unallied orphanage, that wasn't the real problem. The true cost would be reaped in intel, what was known and the price of what remained unknown. Because by now everyone was in accordance with one thing. Whoever made the first push against Awatsuki would be the first to discover what kind of armed resistance the orphanage had at its disposal. Mizu, for all of its bloody history, knew one thing: unknown factors rarely turned out in anyone's favor. Naruto could only wait. Calamity churned beneath the illusion of normality. It wouldn't be long now. There is greed on men's lips. Secrets may be secrets, but shinobi were still shinobi. Naturally, the first is in direct conflict with the second. And logically Naruto should have expected what followed, only somehow he didn't. It was simple in his mind. It was a waiting game, played on the edge of a kunai, between him and some nameless face. They would come for him. The first strike would be loud and blunt, meant to scare more than kill, at least not yet. It would be made to impress. But there was more than one magician on that stage. And Naruto, no matter the lifetime, always aimed to impress like no one else dared. He would never, not anymore, be anyone's caged weapon. Endless fury made to play a child's doll. What did you expect, giving a child that cursed toy? He burned under red clouds and black skies. He knew, even if he didn't, the game of force to be played. Enough and not enough, an edge to balance on. He was shinobi, even if he no longer called himself that. Or maybe just beaten enough to know not to give any information for free. What would come would be a game with just enough power and skill to let it be known that while there was still an aspects of his skill veiled, disclosure was not in anyone's future health. It was simple. But he'd forgotten one thing. Shattered and barely functioning, he'd first built Awatsuki House for children he could only distantly imagine. When he did find them, he did something he probably wasn't healthy enough to do: he loved them. But he'd forgotten. They loved him as well. Naruto didn't know why his eyes burned. He was definitely too old for that shit. They loved him. They loved him. They loved him. Him. He, who was born alone, lived alone, always walked alone. The only time he hadn't fought alone was when he was still not powerful enough to execute wide-scale attacks. After that it was less dangerous to maintain a healthy distance from him and his current target. About the only time he didn't tackle some milestone alone was his execution. Akatsuki had watched till the end. An ember without fire. And somewhere along the way, in his half-insane plan so that a few children would not be as alone as he, and Snowsoft Haku, he'd been given the same gift as his children. They weren't alone. Not them, not him. And no matter what anyone said, his eyes only itched. It was only 5 of them, but those 5 represented all that mattered. Watanuki Rin. Jounin, specialized in reconnaissance and tracking, age 21. Yutaka and Genji, eternal rivals and never far from the other. Respectively specialized in genjutsu and heavy combat. Their rivalry allowed them to flawlessly substitute one set of skills for the other. Jounin, age 20. Yamamoto Hikari. Chunnin, specialized as a mednin, age 15. Ishiro Etsuo. Genin, age 13. To an outsider they weren't anything special besides the obvious. Yutaka and Genji were known bloodline-born, the half-blood relations of some clan or another. But Naruto knew things which traditionally only another Mizu shinobi should know. In the 4 years Rinji had officially been assigned to the intelligence division, he had been making a name for himself on talent alone. Already rumors, the lifeblood of intelligence, pointed to Rinji as a possible successor to the current division head, and the youngest candidate chosen so far. Yutaka and Genji had the distinct honor of becoming the figureheads for other bloodline-born, not all belonged to Awatsuki, of their generation. They were heading the reintroduction Mizu's nearly destroyed bloodlines and acting to dispel the uncomfortable, if not outright prejudiced, notions held by their comrades. It also helped they were both good-natured and geniuses of their discipline. Soft-spoken Hikari was the de facto mother and herder of a large portion of the Awatsuki Chunnin and Genin. Early signs pointed towards a specialization in poisons, ironically in direct contrast to her early exposure to medicinal herbs from Naruto's greenhouse, or maybe because of it. Her growth was made difficult because of the near impossibility in procuring an apprenticeship to even a half-rate medicnin. It was an area of study that came with a long apprenticeship, and because of the greater number of years involved there was also a greater risk of the teacher dying before imparting a full set of skills. It was not a popular area to pursue in turbulent times. Likewise, Ishiro Etsuo was not only the squad captain of a team of all Genin, but the leader of more than half of his Genin year mates. He was predicted to advance in the next Chunin exam, having been withheld in order to make a showing the year the exams were to be held in Konoha. Forget. Let it fade. He was also a throwback to Mizu's silent killing and, had the 7 swordsmen still existed, slated to inherit one of the legendary blades, not that he was old enough to have actually ever seen one of those blades in action. Naruto knew, that though none of them had the character, honor and fortitude and ruthlessness beyond the norm, to become Mizukage, each had the potential of becoming leaders among their peers, and not just their Awatsuki brethren. Each had the potential to be a cornerstone for a true Mizukage, the likes they are all still waiting for. He knew all this about them, knew more than they actually did about themselves, but none of that prepared him to find them tucked all over his office, a room he didn't keep anything he didn't want stolen. Somehow or another, he hadn't been as prepared as he should have been when one of his children directed him to this impromptu meeting. Prepared to face his children. His brilliant, beautiful children. Maybe there was reason enough to want to cry. He'd forgotten. You all realize that I'd prefer whatever mutiny you've all planned to involve a little more blood and ramen and a little less of this office? His greeting earned him one faint smile and two scowls. Sensei, this is a perfectly acceptable office. Now if only you'd use it, Yutaka chided. Naruto snorted at his boy. You're still sore I made you move all the furniture in here before I decided I didn't like it. That desk was a heavy-ass monster, Genji muttered mutinously. He and Yutaka had been made to furnish his ill-fated office. Think of it as a training exercise, Naruto corrected cheerfully. Even Yutaka looked a little sour at that. Ren and Etsuo simultaneously rolled their eyes. Sensei, Hikari said, patiently smiling, a soft fondness in her eyes always Haku-bright. Memories still ached. If you could stop antagonizing Genji-san long enough for this meeting to begin? Naruto ruffled his boy's wild blonde hair fast enough that Genji didn't escape fully as he backtracked into Yutaka's shadow. Hikari leveled a look on them all that more than one person had admitted to being unfairly guilt-inspiring. Naruto smiled unrepentantly even as he settled back down. Sorry, Hikari. I'll behave. Now what seems to be on your mind? And suddenly the indulgent faces of his children faltered. Etsuo glanced at him before looking away, but the other four silently impressed Naruto as they literally squared their shoulders and turned to face him. We're not deaf, you know, Genji began. Naruto resisted the urge to smile. Genji had always reminded him a little too much of his younger self. We're all shinobi of Mizu. Ren, his quiet, intense dark-eyed boy, stepped forward. We're all old enough to understand this house isn't as walled as we used to think. Even Haku-bright Hikari looked a little sad at that. Sensei, Awatsuki isn't as insignificant as it used to be. Yutaka didn't move from his perch next to one cloud-filled window. Sighing softly, he met Naruto's eyes clearly. I think because we all wanted so much because we didn't have much to begin with we succeeded greater than we knew, or maybe even wanted. We are products of our own successes and now Awatsuki is going to be a victim of it, Ren continued. A place that produced even just the 5 of us is tempting. But Awatsuki produced more than just the 5 of us. Naruto had been listening so far, but it wasn't till Etsuo's eyes flinched back that he realized just what his children had been trying to say. He wasn't sure if he wanted to laugh, cry, or rap some knuckles till they understood. Wait a moment. Let your old sensei have a word. Naruto held up both hands before studying each of his children. I've raised each of you for the majority of your lives and honestly, each of you has always been a great deal smarter than I ever was, well perhaps not Genji. The boy sputtered in the background. You really are all very brilliant. But you are all also still young. Guilt has a way of wrecking the most reasonable of situations. Misplaced guilt just mucks up everything more than it should ever be. I know what Awatsuki has become, I practically hauled it there myself. I've watched it become what it is today, and some of you are old enough to have done so as well. I have always been proud of what everyone has done, what all of you have done. Never believed that I or you would have been happy if we'd settled for being a shadow of who you really are. Genji had never been content to remain quiet. But now those scavenging politicians are going to come here and... A fierce huff escaped the boy as he broke off with a glower. They are going to come and take everything we have ever known and change it, Yutaka finished, and despite his calm tone there was something mutinous in his eyes. They are going to come and take Awatsuki from us. From me. Etsuo finally whispered, guilty eyes not quite meeting Naruto's. I'd like to think I didn't raise children with such frail spirits. Naruto said, and even as Etsuo looked taken aback there was something more to Ren's expression. Awatsuki is not so easily bought or sold. It doesn't matter to them that it's Awatsuki this time. Buying, selling, burning. It's been done before, Yutaka pointed out. Normally shinobi politics like these should have been played above the heads of civilians, Ren informed them all, Watanuki Rin, the intelligence agent. It should have fallen to me, the other jounin, or even these twin attack dogs. Genji growled. But Sensei and Rin, whose deductions could have made Naro Shikamaru bring out his shogi set, looked admiringly at his foster father. You, not even the intelligence division knows what you have been doing. Only I've guessed within the division, and that's because I've watched you for years. Sensei, you've been managing Awatsuki's politics, its every dealing, even yourself, to buy time. Awatsuki should have come under attack long before I even made it to Chunin. Naruto grinned at his child. Everything he'd done had bought time. Had bought time, and that's really all they've ever needed. It had given time for each of the children standing before him to grow strong enough to stand by themselves. And that is a miracle too many dead never knew. 11 years and counting. Backs that will never have reason to bend in the deepest humiliation. They are not denied. It's our turn to do our part. Surprisingly, it was Hikari that spoke the ultimatum. You've protected us so we could grow, and now it's our turn to protect you and everyone else here who is our brother and sister. Every other face looked just as fierce as Hikari's, the shared words and oath between them. And Naruto really wanted to knock some heads, preferably those belonging to some silly children. Instead he sighed, mulling over how he should explain so they could understand. Even if he was feeling horribly proud of them at the moment. Ren, let's see how much you've guessed. Dark eyes perked toward Naruto. I'm not trained as a conventional shinobi. Truthfully, if you ever tested me you'd find some genin-sized gaps that would make Etsuo cringe. But I have practiced, a chakra-heavy jutsu every day for over a decade. What do you think that means? You have what I'm guessing to be, an extremely large chakra capacity. If I was to follow speculation, I'd propose this jutsu is not the only one you know. And while I have never personally seen you practice any other, it is within the realm of significant probability that you possess other skills, either physical or equally chakra-intensive. Naruto paused to admire his assessment. That's very logical. While neither confirming nor denying anything proposed, why do you think I never sought to teach or even learn the academy training techniques to either help you or myself? We all know children backed by some clan or faction are practically force-fed extra training. None of you have ever had that advantage. So why was it that instead of filling in that post myself, as I very well could have, I have always hired a genuine team to lead the children's afternoon academy practices? It was Yutaka who answered. Sensei has never wanted to seem a threat. If anyone ever saw you teaching or learning, they would have suspected a lot earlier that Awatsuki is really a training facility. But so long as only Mizu Genin gave us extra training, no one could suspect you. Genji continued, having practically read Yutaka's mind. Also very logical, Naruto approved. Now, why was I always careful? What did I want to protect so much that I protected my image even behind closed doors? They were silent before Etsuo blushed and admitted us. You wanted to protect us. Naruto merely grinned at the boy. That has always been what I wanted. For Awatsuki to be here so that my children could be children. Sensei, Etsuo felt fit to correct as he braced himself, you've always protected us. So you can see, can't you? We want to protect you. Something in him trembled even as for an altogether silly reason his eyes burned a little. It was that moment, staring from out of Etsuo's brown eyes, that a truth Naruto had never been wise enough to see hit him. They loved him. He really was too old to cry. And Naruto blinked a little faster than normal. I am very proud of you for saying so. Bowing his head briefly before raising it to meet every pair of eyes, Naruto continued more fiercely, but this is Awatsuki and Awatsuki will not make personal soldiers of you. And before you start arguing, consider this, you might be willing, but in doing so you create an obligation for every child I have fostered. And even if they are willing, it is not a choice I wish to institutionalize into what we have built here. I appreciate that you all feel strongly about this, but this is another lesson you will all learn. There are times when it is right to fight, and there are times when the wisest thing you could do is talk. There will come a time when we will have a Mizukage that understands the power of words, and although that time is not here yet, it does not make that method any less valid. I expect you have heard about my meetings with the Indu Air and the Mizukage, and logically you feared for the results of those meetings. But it won't be them who pull us down. I've seeded too much doubt and hesitance in both of them for them to be willing to go after me preemptively. And because they will not move, I've spread hesitation among the ranks. I've bought more time. But there will come a time when Sensei can no longer buy a reprieve, Ren accused. That's correct, Naruto admitted frankly. When that time comes, you must trust in my willingness to preserve Awatsuki as the Awatsuki you grew up in. I will do what I must to keep politics away from children too young to be making any such choices. I hope you understand that if Mizu is to ever be united, Awatsuki cannot have its private soldiers. The unhappy cast growing on their faces said more of their understanding than words could. Scowling, Genji glared at the clouds outside. Sensei, you know, sometimes it's very hard being an example. Naruto eyed the boy unsympathetically. Think of it as being a leader. That's not any easier, was the sullen reply. When the time finally came, it was unsurprisingly sprung on what amounted to yet another ordinary day. They had been watching, violet eyes watched back, him for a while, certainly long enough to mark his routine. Perhaps they understood the value of routine. Even if a forgotten part of him chafed under the predictability. Routine bred security for those that knew none. Shinobi bylaws teach one to break routine, but even the best fall into habit. So it was with some assurance that the enemy's operation was planned. Every little piece of data gathered and hemmed into some all-encompassing plan, meant to rebuff every futile struggle. 9 little dolls lined in a row. It was the end of the day. The last infant in his nursery had been fed, burped, and changed. The older children knew well enough when lights out began that there was no need for Naruto to leave more than one solid clone. The jutsu creation settled at the front desk, sleepily reading some scroll or another. An ordinary day. The moment came when he moved through just another step of his routine. Caught at the furthest point from the compound buildings, he'd just begun to padlock the front gates, more of a deterrent to civilian vandals than any substantial threat, when they came. Silent and hidden by shadow and everlasting fog. Sinewy in their hunt and moving on feet that knew full well the role of predator. But he lived in the illusion, reality remade. No doubt they were skilled tacticians, but even the best tactician could only plan so far with only half the intel needed. This was no corral board game, with fixed spots and unchanging potential. Naruto played with a deck full of lying cards and mercurial ghosts. In that existed a disparity no shinobi would ever have time enough to surmount on the first offensive. Ninja wire and chakra strings cut through the wind without a whisper. Despite being an enemy, Naruto freely admitted whoever wielded those weapons could claim real talent. But their mistake was more a matter of luck than anything else. They simply didn't know the wind was the last plane any enemy should want to face Naruto. What they could not know, what they didn't even have a chance of knowing, was the existence of darker days painted in howling wind and blood. Days when he wasn't strong enough, wise enough, to win the heart-aching important battles. When all he could do was fail and retreat. But in retreating there was never any safe haven waiting. Between one impossibility and another he'd retreated to the only place he could, and it came about that in the end too much of himself had fled into the wind. He really didn't know how it had come about, and while he suspected the destroyed Yuzu no Kuni, he'd long since known the unavailability of that answer. That land, dirt ancestors lived and died and were reduced to dust, and the mother, may she be forgotten, that carried that bloodline were all dead for as long as he'd been alive. Many years later he lived in the wind as only nameless, forgotten ancestors once had. And Mizu's legacy of silent killing had always known the intimate coexistence it shared with the wind. But they had never controlled it. Not like he could. So he knew, even as chakra and wire flew, that he controlled the wind it cut. He knew even as those implements wound around his body, jerking him towards the ground and muddying well-worn cloths, that their first attack was meant to contain. Wire bit into his skin and chakra string hummed and burned but kept him deceptively immobile. From his position, he craned his head to side, darkened blue eyes searching the shadows for his assailant. Naruto knew more than enough then to trust the direction from which he'd been attacked. There was a reason Mizu was hailed as the star of silent killing. It said something about Naruto's decade of inactivity and something about the skill of his assailants, that he only had a heartbeat of warning before a gloved hand clamped onto the back of his neck. A strong hand titled his head back uncomfortably far so that he met a cloaked figure standing freely before him. So this is the famed Awatsuki-sensei. Unseen eyes perused the bound figure on the ground in silent contemplation. I have been waiting to meet you for a very long time, sensei. Naruto could not eye the shadowy figure for more than a moment before his neck became too uncomfortable. If you wanted to meet me so much, I'm not averse to having tea during a reasonable hour. A booted foot ground into his lower back. Naruto grimaced and kindly wished his assailants joy for as long as they had him in their custody. Any time afterwards and he might react a bit unfavorably. A comedian, a female voice mocked behind him. They usually laugh right up to the point when they can't. Oh my dear, Naruto blew into the dirt. If you knew me at all. A foot connected to his thigh. What despicable creatures. Kingyo, now is not the time. The first shadow commanded, a hidden glare silencing the female. Now, sensei, don't take this personally. We speak and you hear, understand? Keep it like that, and this night might not turn entirely unpleasant for you. If you insist. A hidden snort. Pay attention. Something sharp bit into his bound upper arm. Blooming in the night, the scent of copper rose. Your activities have come under the attention of very powerful parties. Parties that have no wish to see any more instability added to Mizu. You, sensei, are far too much an unstable little man to be allowed to do as you wish without any oversight. You expect me to accept this like a good little boy? Naruto heckled. Red and copper and silver bit into his shoulder. Briefly pain fluttered in his awareness. Before fading. What use is a scar that does not exist outside the mind? He's never had to know. Not anymore. Pain is fleeting. The parties we represent, the shadow continued calmly and unmoved, wish for you to accept the order of things. Make no mistake, Sensei, things can turn very ugly, very quickly. Behind him the woman chuckled. Personally, I would welcome it. Little man, we know everything about you. What you do every second of every day, what you eat, when you sleep, even when you shit. We know the name and face of every little brat you house in this hovel. So that's it? Naruto sighed, resting his head against mud. You threaten, I listen, and am expected to keep my peace or my children get hurt? See? The shadow acknowledged condescendingly. That wasn't so hard. And who exactly am I expected to obey like a dog? Perhaps they should have been more wary of his calm tone. Oh now, Sensei, that isn't something you'll be knowing. You will know to do what when our backers need you. Do so and your peace and that of Awatsuki House is ensured. Understand this, Mizu can become very unfriendly to a foreigner who thinks he can do as he will. And who will be coming to yank my chain whenever Kami wills it? Clever little man, aren't you? The woman chided before booting him in the stomach. Pain is an illusion within a dream. There will be no information fishing from little men. You can call me Inu-san and my partner Kingyo-san. Do as we say and this will be the only unpleasant visit. Resist and we will have to teach you obedience through any means possible. Naruto craned his head back and stared up at Inu, the perfect picture of a cold and unnaturally calm interrogator while the woman at his back acted, and perhaps it wasn't even an act, as the rabid attack dog. It was definitely an unfortunate occurrence that the heavy clouds prevented the two shinobi from cataloging dark and blue-violet eyes. It would have been helpful if they had. Pressure built up in hidden designs. It might have served as a warning. Inu? Naruto asked pleasantly, grinning in a fashion that had too many teeth. Inu stiffened more on instinct than anything else. There's something you should know. Chakra and order, spirals and command, the body is a puppet and he is a master. Two dull thumps scarcely gave an echo as they impacted. Squirming and untangling the suddenly slack net of ninja wire, Naruto emerged from his little prison. Once free he collected the wire, waste not, want not, and turned to study his once captors. Inu, was it? The cheerful greeting was lost on its unconscious audience. I wanted to tell you, I dislike dogs. Now let's see what little surprises Inu-chan and Kingyo-chan have for me. Deftly Naruto freed one of their kunai to cut the cloth that bound their faces in shadow. He was careful to not cut either of his sleepers, one never knew what enemy shinobi coated their weapons in. Two bemused violet-blue eyes peered at the uncovered faces. Look at what I have here. Aren't you lucky I recognize you, my little lost lambs? It means I can properly return you. Not to worry, you'll both recover in a week or so, but perhaps you'll now know not to attack me on my own territory. A flick of his hands created 3 shadow clones at his back. Without a word they moved toward his sleepers. 2 of them knelt and hefted the lax bodies on their shoulders while the third gave him a thumb up before moving to lead the way to the Higa dwelling. Of course Naruto knew not to stop his investigation with Higa. Behind that family lay the Arakaki, a name he disliked on principle, clan. The origins of his assailants mattered only as much as they led him to who ordered the first strike against him. Perhaps they should have been a little wiser than to attack a seal master on his own territory. His compound had long since been inscribed and embedded with the necessary seals, not that anyone recognized it as such. Any unwelcome presence that threatened his grounds was liable to fall under his seals. As those 2 unfortunate ninja had just discovered. Special seals were designed to send a near unnoticeable electric shock, refined to disrupt the electrochemical signaling between neurons responsible for sensory reception. The instant sensory saturation and abrupt withdrawal was designed to send the nervous system into shock. His captive's exposure would result in a relatively harmless week-long coma. Another seal master might awaken them earlier, but the likelihood of someone recognizing their condition for what it was and furthermore having the chakra to overpower the secondary seals inscribed in their chakra by his own master seal was small. In a week the natural regeneration of an individual's chakra would erase his seals sufficiently for the body to overcome his block. Sometimes even he impressed himself. Absent-mindedly patting the now ruined knee-length tunic he'd worn, Naruto finally padlocked the door. He'd been interrupted long enough. The walk back to his apartments was dark but familiar enough that he did so without stumbling. Pausing, Naruto titled his head to one side before leaving the front gate courtyard entirely. Yutaka and Ren. Naruto smiled into the night as if he hadn't just caught 2 people spying on him. Soft footsteps confirmed his guess. Despite a childhood grudge against geniuses, Naruto had always admired one thing about them: they were always entirely able to arrogantly remain without shame when caught. Two sets of dark eyes studied him like they'd never seen him before. Regardless, Yutaka continued walking till he was close enough for Naruto to only have to raise an arm and he could hug the young jonin. He had no qualms about doing so. Yutaka tolerantly allowed the nearly eye-level man to corral him into a half-hug. What are you two doing out at this time of night? Finally getting a love life? I'll advise you two now, only go after girls whose father can't break every bone in your body. There might be no kinder way to die than like that, but it'll still hurt. Sensei, was the put-upon protest from both his boys. Still so sensitive, Naruto inwardly chortled. You know that's not it, Yutaka protested. What did you do? I know you two were just taking a random stroll and weren't hovering around me. Naruto ruffled the boy's hair as both failed to look at all convincing. Sighing, he continued, I already told you both, I won't be turning Awatsuki into my own private army. Some rather unfortunate fodder learned tonight about just what I am willing to do to keep Awatsuki as it should be. But this is only the beginning, Rin quietly said. Naruto had always believed any good group needed one pessimist. Rin always managed to fill the role admirably. Naruto met his boy's eyes strongly. It is only the beginning and I am in no way done. Trust in me, Rin, Yutaka. We do trust you, Rin protested. But we don't want to lose you, Yutaka admitted. Naruto gave a soft laugh. He hugged Yutaka first before releasing him and moving to hug Rin. To his surprise, Rin returned his embrace just as fiercely as he used to when he was nothing but a mute little boy attached to his hand. I don't play fair, Naruto confessed. For two such solemn boys, it was still somewhat surprising when they smiled back at him. It was almost like they could guess what previously unknown methods Naruto would soon engage in. Thank you, Rin murmured quietly before leaving Naruto to enter his apartment. The dark-eyed young man didn't say for what, but Naruto didn't have to guess. Home remained. Violet eyes slept. The first shadow attack on his person came and went without trouble. If perhaps there was a new tenseness on his little watcher's well, it was only to be expected. Events continued as they always had. His watchers noted the near infrequency in which his actual body left his compound, something that had never seemed all that important in the presence of an armada of clones. Most often either outside traders dealt directly on his property, or his clones were sent out on errands. No further plan could be enacted at that time with any degree of success. Certainly not with so little information, the likes of which everyone fully acknowledged. It was also reluctantly acknowledged that the Indu clan hadn't been foolish in keeping their distance. Two rather unlucky ninja already discovered the impracticability of attacks staged at his home. There was also a new level of consideration given to him. While before he had always been an admirably intelligent and savvy civilian, now a whole slew of people were forced to reclassify him. The skills he showed were shrouded in shadow, like any true professional, but the knowledge of their existence forced watchers to label him as unknown. And Mizu had never been lucky when dealing with the unknown. The greedy factions had no choice but to simmer in the background. Even they knew better than disturb the illusion of normality. One civil war could be traced to just such an action. People bred on war are the most adept at recognizing it. No one could deny Mizu had done just that for over 2 generations now. But still that unsettling feeling nestled at the pit of his stomach. Whatever ominous star he was under had not retreated from him yet. Something odd still lurked in his future. Something that, even as ignorant of the events as he was, still inspired a feeling of anxiety. Good or bad remained to be seen. But life continued and the year ended. In this there is hope. Awatsuki House stayed out of debt, old students left to new homes, either as tradesmen or shinobi, and new orphans crept in through the servants' entrance. Besides the construction of the greenhouse, no new additions had been made. But that summer Naruto could no longer avoid remodeling as the dormitories became full. The once grand master bedrooms of the Hoshigaki clan had been reduced to full dormitories, and even the smaller rooms that no doubt belonged to either distant relations or important servants were given as private quarters to 2 to 4 children at a time. Given his skill with clones and the numerous hands available through Awatsuki's residence, the new dormitory was completed in a matter of months. However, Naruto could no longer avoid the truth. By the end of the next year, Awatsuki House would be forced to refuse entry for the first time since its inception. Something in him cringed at the thought. 6 years old and already independent. A childhood denied. Things were different. Naruto had knowledge and will enough to tackle any endeavor. He would no longer stand for being a spectator as life moved its course without him. He wasn't a helpless little boy whose home denied the nature of his existence. He wasn't. And he knew how he could alter life's path. All it took was a step. Well, more than a step, to be honest. It did take 3 hours travel by shinobi sprint, or a day for a civilian cart, to reach the village of Shinj. Shinj was smaller than Mizu, roughly 1/14 the size of the metropolis Mizu represented. Besides being one of the many outlying farming communities that fed Mizu, it had two claims to fame. The first was its location as the burial and death place of Matsuyama Shiomi, one of 2 swordsmen of the mist that did not defect and the only woman included in the last generation of the illustrious group. After the breaking of the greatest generation of swordsmen, the group that had served Mizu since its inception was never recreated. More than half of the swords that represented the group left with the defectors, and only one was ever recovered in the time since. As such, Shiomi remained the first and last woman to serve as a swordsman of the mist. Perhaps it was unlucky for Shiomi to remain loyal. 5 years after the breaking of the swordsmen, Shiomi would be killed in one of the nameless conflicts that defined Mizu's civil wars. Consequently, she was also the first to die in her generation of swordsmen. Her home in Shinj would be the site of her death. Afterwards, her sword was taken from her body and framed with the only other brother blade the Mizukage still held. Shinj's second claim to fame was the exact reason Naruto's attention was first caught by the sleepy community. Most outlying farming communities could at most claim a mid-sized home as the height of opulence. However, nearly 50 years ago a daimyo had thought his legacy everlasting. With that thought in mind, he'd embezzled a good amount of money to fund the construction of a compound that would become the seat of his line. Unfortunately, that lofty dream and line only extended till his son ran into gambling difficulties. The compound was sold to some upstanding family, and resold throughout the years. The sad reality remained that anyone with enough wealth to maintain the daimyo's compound was not inclined to settle in Shinj. Becoming more of a novelty than anything else, the increasingly unkempt compound was even at one time the home of Matsuyama Shiomi. It was also one of the initial prospective sites for Awatsuki House. It was merely a matter of fate that it wasn't until only last year that the owners' own difficulties were forcing them to liquidate their acquisitions. The money required and the unique location of the compound dissuaded most interested parties. But for Naruto's purposes it was ideally suited. The establishment of a second orphanage would be an even greater production than the first, especially since it would be built along slightly different lines. Awatsuki's own beginnings were kept simple due to the larger population's indifference and his own solitary work. Shinj House would be an event on par with an entirely different organizational process. It wouldn't even be an orphanage in the traditional sense. No children younger than 13 would be residents. Naruto still felt his unique method of child rearing was so far the most effective. He had all the hands in the world to do what he needed to do. To begin with, the compound had to be remodeled and refurnished. He had to canvass through his older children in order to mesh together a suitable staff for Shinj House. While Awatsuki House would remain his primary residence, the distance involved to Shinj would mean a stretching of his attention. He would need to promote a similar staff for Awatsuki. Shinj House also represented the introduction of an idea he'd meant to develop further. Limited space prevented Awatsuki's greenhouses from expanding. Shinj would therefore be designed as a center for the production of potent medicinal herbs, those studying them, as well as other forays in the medical fields. A school for all intent and purposes. Construction on the project began mid-fall and was hurriedly completed so that the interior remodeling could occur during the wet winter and spring seasons. But in the midst of all that planning, Mizu's traditional year-ending celebrations brought travelers from all around for the week-long festival. It also reminded Naruto just how fragile his reality still was. Calamity had never left him. The spirit of revelry was present days before the festival truly began. Mizu as a whole was met with an influx of travelers and traders. Wares were brought and showcased in the week-long open-air market. Despite the festivities, Naruto endured what he imagined every parent learned to recognize as parental anxieties. He, more than anyone, knew how tempers could be brought to a boiling point in a matter of minutes. A mob was capable of things no self-respecting individual would consider. That didn't mean Awatsuki House was at all isolated from the goings-on around. His children had as much right to indulge in celebrations as any citizen of Mizu. The increase in comings and goings also meant visitations from children who had already left him. It was one such visit that gave Naruto a truly horrible revelation. Ironically, the visitor in question, a girl named Mei, was one of the sweetest girls he knew. Mei, sweet and kind, married a new farmer who settled in one of the abandoned plots that still surrounded Mizu. She was pretty as only a country girl could be. By the time Naruto saw her again, she had grown a little plumper and rosier, but that is not what had him staring. In her hands a curious bright-eyed infant made futile graping motions. The boy couldn't be older than a few months, and his arrival, by mere sight alone, was a definite pleasure to Mei and her overeager farmer husband. Mei and her husband bowed in greeting when they arrived, her deference obviously passed on to the man she married. We hope the festivities have treated you well, Sensei. As well as they ever do, Mei. Now introduce me to these two young men. It's been, 3 years since you wrote you were getting married. Mei blushed. My husband, Ogawa Tuya. Naruto bowed back in greeting. All three were dressed in decorative kimonos, and it seemed the only right thing to do. It was about the only time in the year that his gray and tan tunics and pants always seemed to be misplaced. Instead, in what apparently was someone's idea of cute, he would spend the week dressed in all shades of blues. Mei and Tuya were likewise dressed. It was obvious even under the courtyard's shade that the two wore plainer garments, lovingly preserved for years of special occasions. They were probably poor and frugal, but even as he leaned over to kiss Mei's brow, Naruto could sense determination and so much life. I am very happy for you both, and although my congratulations come late, I wish you both a prosperous future. Thank you, Awatsuki-sama. Tuya grinned and blushed. I am very glad to finally meet you, and I would like to personally thank you for all you have done for me. I am very happy to have met her. Naruto grinned helplessly at the besotted couple. Sensei, we're also in Mizu to register our son with the Central Administration Office. The Ogawas, Tuya's family, do not name their children till they reach 6 months. My son is now 7 months, and I would like it very much if you could name him. Seeing Mei stare up him with such a hopeful expression, the only thing Naruto could do was reach out for the child and control the blush that was threatening to rise. A soft body curled up toward him, hands fisting in bright blonde hair that remained unbound to match the formality of his clothes. A child, a boy, and eventually a man. Son of Mei, the girl that only cried desperate sobs under an ancient maple tree. A child, a future that was not there the first time he saw Mei. A future that lives now. Kaimu, Naruto blessed, fingers tracing a pattern he'd only ever seen his old teacher, bittersweet memories ached in remembrance, used once when blessing a similar child. Kaimu. The child gurgled. Tuya's hands rose to take the boy, eyes fastened to the sight of the newly named infant. Ogawa Kaimu. Luckily for Naruto, Mei was the only one crying when she leapt to hug Naruto. Thank you, Sensei. Thank you for a lot of things I probably don't understand yet. But I will. Mei kissed his cheek. I will. I'm a mother. You are, Naruto confirmed more to himself than anyone. Idly he wondered if this is how a parent felt when their child suddenly became an adult. Pride and a bittersweet ache nestled in his scarred heart. Mei's hands were still on his shoulders when they moved to trace his face. I'm very happy, Sensei. You look just like you did the day I came here. Goodbye and thank you. Both waved as they closed the compound gates. Naruto remained standing where he had been, hand frozen to the same spot Mei had touched. Yutaka! The boy leapt down from one of the many courtyard trees, deftly landing 2 feet to his left. Sensei? Can you call Kana out here to greet any well-wishers? I think I need to lie down for the rest of the afternoon. Yutaka paused, warily eyeing the blond man for any trace of sickness. As you wish. Naruto didn't wait for either. Only years of patience kept him from dashing to his apartment. For the first time since he moved in, he locked his room, the ancient lock creaking slightly as it was forced into activity. Entering his bedroom, he drew the shutters close, letting only a sliver of weak winter light in. He turned the lamp next to his dresser mirror on and for the first time in years studied his reflection. The man that looked back at him was impressive. The eyes were always the first thing anyone ever noticed, blue as the ocean under the summer sky. Blonde hair was unbound and loose down to his mid-back. Dressed in a layered kimono, every shade of blue included and finished off with an elaborate design one of his girls had gifted him. But the man, there were signs of maturity not present the first time he moved into his apartments. There were other changes, obviously longer hair and more practical and conservative clothes. His eyes had also gained a depth they didn't used to have. But the man. If those things were taken away, one by one peeled away from his superficial dress. The man that looked back at him had not aged. Slowly, so slowly he wasn't sure till his knees hit the wooden floor, Naruto crumpled. Why was it so hard to catch his breath? Air whizzed in and out, and somehow coming too fast and never enough. Why couldn't he catch his breath? Hands folded over his mouth, breath still not enough as it warmly caught in his palms. Please stop. He didn't notice when his eyes screwed shut. The world will change forever. Red clouds and black skies whispered down to him. Die now. It's alright to let go. You did everything you could. Hands fisted into blonde hair and pulled. Wake up now. He tasted blood as he bit his lower lip. Warm red and copper scent surged over his chin, and already the imprint was knitting without even scabbing over. Wake up now. Mei and Tuya and Kaimu and many more. A girl that became a woman and then a mother, and would one day be a grandmother. Tuya, ambitious and young and an idealist farmer that would make a home for everyone that called him father. A son that would grow and father his own boy and then another. Live for now and forget the red dreams and black skies. There is this now, no fire and forest to ruin it all again. Wake up now. Grow and live, and one day, you too, will die warm in a bed. Wake up now. Why were his memories shouting? There is a boy with 6 scars, gone now, on his face, bright and grinning and so desperately alive. He lives a death sentence, a father's gift, and burns every day for every moment. A boy who wants everything, power, pleasure, pain. It is merely proof that life still lingers. The world will change forever. Red clouds and black skies whispered down to him. Not right. That dream had no right to come to life again. It was over. He made it so. Wake up now. Why were his memories shouting? Believe it! But that was also wrong. Bow and burn incense, but there are no gods he prays to. Lofty figures that turned away when man dealt with demons they had no right in touching. He did not have faith, not in any god and not in any predetermined design. Gods that looked away. Red clouds and black skies. Wake up now. This is not a dream. He did not need the mirror. The image would not change with a second inspection. It might be a very long time before it changed again. The man looking back at him had not aged. Calamity was born in the wake of red clouds and black skies. Men that played gods and shared the divine fate of twisting every well-meaning intention. There was no monster chained as a servant. No summons that belonged to 9 dead men. There once was one such creature. A howling, glowing, maddening sealing beast that broke under calamity. An existence that was powerful and destructive and useless in every way that mattered. Calamity cut and cried and tore the union of man-made divinity from this plane. Why had his sentence never ended? He could not hide from it any longer. 12 years were long enough. Unnatural, a woman had once whispered to a 4-year-old boy, blonde and blue-eyed. The first memory in a life made of extremes. Though it slept, calamity had always existed, lived in every waking breath. He knew that now. But still. Wake up now, he cried softly, mouth pressed to the wooden floor. It was not a dream. Perhaps it said something dubious of a character that it could break one night and continue duties the next. Perhaps it said something of the character's instability to be able to suffer through a fracture and then play the role of a perfectly functioning man. Perhaps. But no one was really any the wiser. Besides, he'd always been remarkably unstable, adept in continuing when he needed to continue. It also helped that distractions were far and numerous. Always something to do. Always. And then on the 3rd night of the festival he woke an hour after midnight, and suddenly that anxious feeling in his stomach, festering for nearly a year, was gone and he knew what needed to be done. That ominous star had finally answered him. He could deal with that. He found Kana and Izumi playing poker, and losing, with 2 of his shadow clones. They were at the dormitory's front desk, still awake and dutifully seeing to the night watch. Izumi saw him first, the shadow clones having decided to ignore his presence. Sensei? I thought you only created 2 clones for the night? I'm not a clone. The girl blushed and leapt to give him a bow. Ah. Sorry, Sensei. Don't mind me, Izumi, Naruto waved it off. I need to tell you both something. I must leave right away. I've already created some clones that will help you out during the day. They should last till I'm back. Shouldn't you call in some of the shinobi to stay here or accompany you, Sensei? Kana questioned. Not really. I'd rather not attract any attention. If all goes well, no one should know I left and came back. How long will you be? Izumi asked, but both girls looked equally worried. Despite knowing of the rumored protections that defended Awatsuki, everyone was always infinitely more at ease knowing that Naruto was there. Depends on how stubborn the person I'm going to see is. At the latest, I'll be back the last day of the festival. Plenty of time to mix in with all the travelers. If you say so. Till then, Kana, you are in charge. The woman nodded decisively. Naruto studied her briefly before returning her nod. This would be the first time she would be in charge without Naruto there. Glancing at his clones, which had so far remained impassive, and knowing without a doubt they would harass the clones he just created for information, he added, "Don't beat the girls too badly." He knew himself. "Why?" one muttered mutinously. "You do it all the time, boss." Naruto grinned helplessly under two feminine glares. "Anyway, I'll see you later." "Safe journey, Sensei," Kana said. Naruto left the dormitory building, pack already waiting. Pausing, he glanced at the shadowy branches of the courtyard trees. "Take care and behave, Yutaka, Nariaki." "Safe journey, Sensei," the leaves whispered back. His figure faded into the shadows, the wind whispered and he was gone. It didn't look anything like it had a long time ago. Years of natural growth had hidden pocket marks and jutsu scars, powerful and deadly forces were flung around with only one goal. The area now was indistinguishable from the surrounding brush. It was now only a battlefield that lived in the memories of those that survived. By all rights, he wasn't one of those that should know the ghost of that battlefield. It wasn't his. He would neither be able to say who died nor who fought. But he knew the graveyard. Knew it as the place where a legendary medic of noble birth proved how human she could be when she was broken. And now, over a decade since he saw that legendary medic, and even more since he saw signs of life in her eyes, he sought her shade. Something within him, something given freely, woke and recognized her once more. Every beat of his heart whispered something forgotten. So it was that more than a decade into his arrival in Kirigakure, in Mizuno-kuni, his feet moved and he did not resist their journey down a half-forgotten path. Even if it took him uncomfortably close to a land he was better off not recalling. Let it be forgotten. He did not know the battlefield, but he knew the land, knew miles and miles of sunlight filtered through brilliant green leaves. Knew the half-damp and heavy smell of brush that never truly dissipated from under an endless canopy. He knew it from memories that painted years of his life, memories he knew better than to think he was healthy enough to remember. Let it be forgotten. That time has not yet come. But this place and time was different, and he remembered something else. It does not hurt to remember. No condemning ache that hurts in all that is forgotten. Not everything was paid in blood. Warm honeygold eyes and a mane of blonde hair. In his mind she was proud and fierce and defensive in her hurt, but always bright. It wasn't her skills or looks that first caught and endeared his attention. No. What he noticed first and remembered always was how very much she was alive. A pyre of rage and resentment and towering conviction. He wasn't in the habit of playing what-ifs and dreaming the probabilities, but even he couldn't quite stop the half-ache in wondering if it would have been different if only she'd been there. 2 years before his breaking, and a breaking was what he knew it to be, he'd lost her to an endless sleep. Death did not sever that bond, an event so common, but sleep still took her from him. And now, past one life and into another, the leaves bloomed and his heart said something new. A battlefield he did not know under a canopy he'd never seen. But she was there. She was there. Bedecked in fallen leaves and stray dirt stains, she was no longer the princess of her youth, false or otherwise. She was a woman grown, broken, and remade. She was tired and still very weak from her impossible awakening. Pride and pig-headed stubbornness still ruled her because even as a woman, weak and nearly helpless, it was her right to lay like a forgotten queen, because she too is Hokage, on the forest floor and remember boys with blonde hair who made her smile and will never come back. She wasn't young nor was she hidden under an eternal youth illusion. She lay as she was, like any other white-haired, wrinkled crone of her youth, like the ones she never thought she'd become. As she rested there, gods knew only what bugs crawling into her hair, remembering blue eyes and dreams, she thought, let this be enough. But despite their disuse, her senses were not completely deaf. That was why she heard the measured footsteps, light and sure like shinobi were taught to be. She may have been an old woman, but she was still a kunoichi that ended innumerable others, so she had no illusion of her prospects. It was almost disappointedly appropriate that Tsunade of the Sannin should die a helpless crone. She was the last Sannin, a student of the professor, to live, and she would break tradition and not die for or because of a student. There is a wistful peace as footsteps finally settled near her head and out of line of sight. Softly loose folds of cloth whispered as the person behind her kneeled. Light fingertips settled at her temple, and yet still she knew no relief. Plenty of her compatriots needed only a touch to erase life. But it was only when her face was tilted back that she knew something else. Tsunade could not name the feeling that ran all over her body, swift and sharp. Pain and pleasure, everything she'd wanted and everything that could destroy her. It was like dawn breaking. Tadaima, Bachan. Blue eyes and sunbright hair. Two hearts found a peace thought lost. Her body half rose before folding on itself. Too weak, Tsunade thought for the first time since awakening. Too weak when all she wanted was to hug and punch the man in front of her. Everything she wanted and everything that could destroy her. Breathing and living, whatever he was, and she didn't really know if it was affection, hope, or even just a goal, but he really was all she needed to wake up from the half-dream she'd dwelt in ever since she awoke from her coma 3 months ago. They told me you died, she finally said through numb. Had they always been so numb? Lips? Odd, she couldn't remember. Naruto half smiled at the entirely too complicated answer. I think I did, but it's complicated. A soft snort, and Tsunade closed her eyes against the stray sunlight. Isn't it always? Naruto sighed and folded his knees, content to study the older, smaller-boned version of a woman who'd been aunt and grandmother and leader to him. For a legendary medic nin, you're taking shitty care of yourself. Wrinkled fingers curled into a fist before falling slack. I'd like to see you after a 13-year coma. There's only so much physical therapy they can give a still body. Blue eyes studied the light cotton shift Tsunade wore under her overrobe. It was clear she'd stolen away from medical care. Only a hospital would assign something so sterile-looking. If you had been anyone but the Godame, they wouldn't have kept you on life support for nearly that long. Tsunade felt oddly bemused at that statement, words entirely at odds with the memory of a younger, more naive boy who'd just as soon fight rabidly against inevitable death as eat his next meal. You've grown. An odd quirk tilted his lips. Yeah, it's been a while. Naruto continued his observation. Hey Bachan, will you come home with me? Aren't I a little old for a boy your age? Shut it. Tsunade, damp ground beneath her and brilliant green and gold canopy above her, could only close her eyes at the complete absurdity of the situation. Even she could tell she'd been depressed ever since her awakening. There were still people around that knew her and welcomed her, but the knowledge that 13 years separated their lives left her feeling like an outsider. There was something bitter, betrayed, in her the first time she saw a little girl with pale pink hair and green eyes. It wasn't the first time she'd lost or given up a home. It wasn't even the first time she'd nearly died protecting it either. But she felt cheated all the same. Why? Why did she have to lose everything? Why did every piece of familiarity come with an undertone of alienness that made her bristle like an offended cat? Why didn't she die 13 years ago? Why didn't she wake fast enough to catch the lives of everyone that had left her behind? Some part of her had half wanted to die in this empty grove. Some part had wanted to close her eyes and let go of every ghost. And funny that the ghost of a boy that had managed to goad her into one home was now inviting her to another. Gold-brown eyes opened again to glance at the young man that had so far settled for gazing out at the surrounding brush. She wasn't used to this patience. At least his face didn't unsettle her as much as most everyone else had. He still looked like the boy she remembered. Still? Naruto slowly. Tsunade pulled herself up, wrinkled hand ghosting along a smooth hand. A boy's hand. Why, you're Jiraiya's student. He was about the only one of our original cell that didn't try and cheat death. A soft laugh. It's funny, isn't it? I really should have been Orochimaru's apprentice with how things came about. Bachan, I'm not a host anymore. Naruto paused, feeling strange. It was the first time he'd said it out loud. This was the first time he talked about a time he could only remember under a red haze. Howling, grinning, crying. Burning eternity trapped beneath human skin. It escaped. It was extracted, but messing with demons couldn't be healthy for anyone. I died and then I didn't. I might have gone a little crazy, but as a shinobi, it was bound to happen. He half shrugged, half frowned, not sure exactly what he was trying to say. Finally he settled for the simplest answer. I've given up that lifestyle. So that's why Konoha thinks you're dead? You gave up on being Hokage? I really am like Orochimaru, Naruto admitted with a grimace. There's always another way. I've given up on being a Kage, but that doesn't mean I won't help someone there. I don't know how, but I'll see it a Kage takes the seat. Tsunade snorted. How I could never figure out half the crazy things you were planning. So boy, where exactly is your home? Kirigakure. Both blondes eyed each other. As in the Bloody Mist? As in we've seen more civil wars than Mizukiges? Tsunade asked hesitantly. That Mizu? Ah, it sounds right. Tsunade closed her eyes. It sounds like you. Eh? What's that supposed to mean? She didn't know why she suddenly wanted to smile. There hadn't been many things that had made her smile. Naruto, you haven't changed at all. Blue eyes blinked owlishly. He thought he'd already admitted he had. You do realize Konoha thinks I'm dead, I'm no longer a host, I've given up being a shinobi, and I might very well raise the next Mizukage? She merely smiled. Idiot. As if any of that matters. You are still Naruto. He shrugged, content to let the old lady make her own delusions. Whatever you say. Idiot. Tsunade never said anything and Naruto didn't ask again. They camped that night, and neither made any mention of the battlefield turned burial ground that they settled in. Naruto had leaned in the time since he'd last seen the old lady that some things were better left unspoken. There was no need to poke at scabs that were bitter and precious. Next morning they started walking towards the sea. Tsunade always did have the bad habit of following Naruto home. Enough reminiscing. Naruto, have you seen a specialist of any sort? Seal, medical, or even just arcane? Arcane? What? You're not exactly the first generation of hosts, though your sealing was done more than a bit different than the rest. I don't think we ever did find record of the Kyuubi being successfully sealed. I didn't know that. As I recall, you were never very interested in the details, or curious of anything outside your personal goals. The Kyuubi is infamous for more than just being the greatest demon. I was a kid, give me a break. And what about now? Aren't you curious about all the lore that surrounds hosts, demons, and sealings? Ah, a dry cave and howling stone. 9 shadows and painted clouds. Let it end. Honestly, I haven't been stable enough to find out. Tsunade paused their trek. She had a feeling Naruto was talking about more than just the odd fetishes and obsessive-compulsive behaviors shinobi found to cope with the lifestyle. From her side, Naruto's eyes were oddly shrouded, so differently from their childhood fierceness, and his whole body was tensed. Bachan, I don't think you understand, at least not entirely. I wasn't porn-writing crazy or gambling-addicted kind of crazy. I died. I don't know how Akatsuki functioned as well as they did for mostly being near immortal, but I didn't. I went crazy. Crazy as words have colors and one thought isn't necessarily connected to the other. Crazy as in I made Akatsuki look sane, at least they were somewhat in touch with their version of reality. I don't think I even had that much. I've gotten better. Mostly nowadays I like to stay on the right side of psychotic. I've never told anyone, but for a few years it wouldn't have taken more than a paper cut for me to recreate a Mist-style civil war. As a medic nin, Tsunade had more than a suspicious of what state of mind someone as exuberantly extreme as someone with Naruto's traits could have fallen into. Someone who celebrated the smallest joys so fiercely was equally as likely as to be cut just as viciously by tragedies. And how odd it was to find him now so tightly contained, restrained in a way that spoke more of veteran shinobi who had been conditioned to think their every touch was death in the making. It wasn't that Naruto had gained introspection or anything like that in the ensuing years, Tsunade realized. Rather, he had gained a new somberness, an air of heaviness that had learned the consequences of actions. It wasn't a beaten-down weariness as some would think. No, Naruto had been, as odd as it was, refined. And now? How do you explain your appearance? A half-smile twisted into a grimace. Tsunade, it's better if you do not pry too deeply into this. Naruto? What's wrong? What does it mean to be a Jinchuriki, Tsunade? What is sacrificed? Naruto? I am no longer a Jinchuriki, but I never stopped being a human sacrifice. You shouldn't think about it any deeper than that, Bachan. Tsunade mulled the words spoken, and maybe because she had spent a lifetime gaining skills necessary to save lives that she knew there was very little she could do. There were always walls that no amount of scaling could overcome. She was no seals expert, and her studies into the arcane, knowledge that could have pointed out signs associated with the Kyuubi's presence, was limited. She suspected whatever was going on within Naruto's body was far past the records kept from half a dozen other hosts, and well into territory involving half a dozen gods. It should never be forgotten that besides sealing an unimaginable being of rage and power, the presence of the Shinigami was called upon. There were more than a dozen possible reasons why Naruto remained ageless, and most could be traced back to some divinity. All were certainly associated with some inhuman power. She didn't say anything when Naruto quietly handed her comfortable clothes, certainly less conspicuous than hospital gear, and pulled out a headdress of his own. Yards of cotton and wool patterned cloth wrapped around his head and came up under his eyes before falling to his chest in the front and even lower in the back. Wrapped as he was, he looked very much like the Suna tribesmen or snow villagers she remembered from distant missions. Finally, only his eyes remained bare, and for the first time she realized his endless sky-blue eyes had changed. There was a darker tint to them. Most would say they were only a darker shade of blue, but in the unprejudiced light she saw the truth. They gleamed purple. Even a child knew what shade blue needed to make purple. And most disquieting of all was the knowledge that he freely admitted to no longer being a host. Knowing all this and suspecting a great deal more, Tsunade accepted for the first time that she had spent more than a decade in a coma. The world had changed, and with it her precious charges had grown and become people she didn't entirely recognize. But even as Naruto slowed his pace to match hers, she knew it did not change a thing. She was too old and far too worn to undertake a conspiracy of divine origin. There was a sort of helpless peace that came with old age. Her greatest battles were already behind her. "Where are we going?" Naruto was startled enough to pause his steps. It had been a while since either had made an effort to talk. They both had too many things weighing their thoughts. "Kirigakure to begin with. I've seldom left home in the last few years." "What sort of business are you involved in?" In retrospect, Tsunade should never have assumed it would be troublesome deciphering Naruto's body language once he started wearing his shroud. As it was, the way his eyes crinkled said more for his contentment than any grin could have. And it was actually more honest than many of his grins. "I run an orphanage." Damn. There were many things Tsunade could have said, but that summed it all. "Ah, yeah? The orphanage also serves as a primary school for younger children and trade school for older ones. I know Mizu's infrastructure has had some blows, but for their education system to collapse as well?" "Not exactly. Honestly, the last 5 years have seen the most stability to Mizu in a long while. Of course, that doesn't mean a civil war, and new Mizukage is not due in a few years or so. But it almost sounds like you're isolating your orphanage." "Necessity. Exactly what kind of strays did you think I would pick up?" Tsunade smiled at the rather redundant question. The only thing that would incite more controversy than a Jinchuriki is a bloodline, especially with how Mizu historically views them. "Yeah." Naruto shrugged carelessly, as though he hadn't started a one-man movement aimed at tolerance. "Hey, Bachan, what do you feel about the name Kaori?" "Kaori pretty? What now, you getting ready to name a child?" "Well, not that I haven't done that many times, but I would think it wouldn't be so bad for you to become the first living Kage a village actually lost." "Living?" Naruto scoffed at a passing tree. "For a couple years, I actually saw more desecrated dead Kages than living. It's almost a guarantee that if they're not burned, and sometimes even then, a Kage's body will fall to grave robbers, and not the type that are more concerned with worldly possessions over biological samples." Unseen, Tsunade grimaced at his back. "I can live with being Kaori." "Probably best." Naruto thought about asking Tsunade all manner of other things. He wondered if she was content with leaving everything she knew, even if she was terribly out of date. He wondered if it wasn't mere rebelliousness that made her follow him back to his new home. He wondered if she had it in her to accept what he truly was. But mostly he wondered what the old woman at his back represented to the broken man he was. "And second?" "Huh." "Second," was the brisk reminder she gave. "First we would go to Kirigakure." "Oh. Second. Well, hidden or not, it's a little too tempting to hide a former Kage in a foreign military village. Especially at times like this. I'm currently involved in some delicate negotiations with certain parties." The snort at his back was enough reply at his entirely frivolous estimate. "Anyway, my trust is expanding into a smaller village. There's a new orphanage being built, and I think it wouldn't hurt to acquire some experienced mednin to take out their old age on a new generation." He tilted his head to eye her. "Oh my, look at my luck, here's one now." "Call me an old biddy again and I'll hand you your spine," she grumbled. "I've never been the most loyal of people, and honestly the only reason I assented as far as I did was because of my power. But I can't in good conscience teach hidden techniques to people that might become my home's enemies." Naruto liked selective deafness, both in dealing with children and in bottling things he was better of not remembering. "I doubt it will ever come to that. I'm mostly in the civilian sector of things. No way any of these shinobi would allow themselves to be treated by hands not personally vetted 10 times over, and I'm still too suspect for any of that." "I'm sure you read super secret documents about Mizu's politics. 13 years ago. Mizu isn't exactly jumping into progress anytime soon. There's enough paranoia bred into them that you can literally taste it in their breast milk. Speaking of that, I once heard a wet nurse poisoned herself just so she could pass it on in her milk to some important heir or something to that effect. Living is a business to some, you see. Her lips curled in disdain, but she remained silent. She knew Konoha had been lucky in its prosperity, even if her current company wasn't a complete beneficiary of that easy lifestyle. Her travels had shown her more than enough of the inhuman heights men would reach. It said something about them when both Naruto and Tsunade had sneaked through tighter wound compounds than the security that surrounded Mizu. Especially when Mizu, having to contend with decades of instability, was more tightly wound than a war veteran. Of course, most security seals that protected a village of any size were merely a matter of time for a seal expert as good as Naruto to unravel. Mizu's chances dropped even further when said man had actually lived within Mizu for several years and managed to anchor his own seals without disturbing the existing net. "I am Awatsuki Naruto," was all he said before their re-entry. Once inside, they drifted through the last day of celebrations, lost among the revelers. "This way, Kaori-san." It was nothing like anything she had been expecting. It dwarfed even Konoha's generous orphanages, and they were dutifully funded by a well-off Hokage's office, and looked something more akin to a clan compound. Even the walkway to what appeared to be the main building was lined expertly with trees and shaded by a delicately crafted arbor. It was all very artful and beautiful, and not something she imagined could survive years of rambunctious children. As a former teammate to both Jiraiya and Orochimaru, she was sensitive enough to pick up the press of seals that marked the boundary. They felt heavy as best she could surmise, a feeling she regularly took to equate with dangerous, and likely very lethal. There was no doubt the seals surrounding this orphanage were equal, or even better than the ones that surrounded Konoha. She'd always been too logical, a must in her own field, to advance overmuch with seals. She just wasn't made for the intuitive illogical leaps. That field was more suited to a porn author and his ramen-loving student. An idealistic part of her could only image what Naruto could have done as Hokage. What he could have been without the burden he was given. And while he would have kept his innocence, inborn human naiveties, longer, by the time he would have matured, Tsunade did not doubt he would have been even greater than his father. But life was tragic like that. And now she had the feeling that, if asked, the man in front of her would not be able to deny hating his father for what he did and who he had been. Because even Tsunade, for all that she had loved him, had not been able to put Naruto above everything else. No one ever had. It was all that much bitter to realize that his own father had knowingly not chosen him, had chosen his people over his son. In a way, she'd always been lucky to remain childless. "Kaori-san? It's too late for there to be anyone up. I'll lead you to a bed for the night. Unfortunately, housing is tight right now, but there's a free bed in a private room. It will have to do for a few days." "Ah, fine," she dumbly replied, a little startled by the sudden abruptness of his manner. A part of her still expected his youthful face to turn to her. A downside to his unchanging appearance, it made it harder to remember that the boy she knew had been a man on his own for many years now. "This way, this is Rhine Dormitory. It mostly contains private rooms for older civilians. A lot of them are on my staff or work within the village as apprentices." The hallway was clean with surprisingly tasteful furniture decorated the wide passage. It all had an antique look to it, and she realized it was probably a remnant from previous owners. It was an innocuous fact, but it made her realize whoever had inhabited this compound before did not have the chance to pack when they were evicted. "Please wait a moment while I wake them." A soft knock and even quieter click was the only noise made as the young man beside her disappeared into the open door, swift hands completely folding the headdress he'd first pulled down once they made it into the compound proper. Tsunade was left idle, a flashlight in her hands pointed at the ground. Her sensitive ears picked up small noises even if the room's darkness left little visibility. "Izumi?" Cloth ruffled. "Wake up, Izumi." "Huing." "Izumi?" "Father?" was the sleepy rumble. Outside, Tsunade sightlessly stared at the opposite wall, her mouth dropping slightly. "Father? Where's Kana?" More cloth rustled. "Ugh, night duty." "Izumi, I need to house somebody. Do you mind if she uses the free bed?" A soft click illuminated the room, spilling light into the dark hallway. From her spot, Tsunade could finally see inside. Naruto knelt beside a bed with a young woman propping herself up, one hand shading her eyes. The room was larger than expected, but considering the occupant was a woman, Tsunade could understand the improved accommodations. 2 beds were placed against one wall, a night table between them, while on the opposite wall another bed lay parallel. The room was lightly decorated with girlish touches here and there, hints of the two women that shared the room. Izumi rubbed dazed eyes. "Fa sensei?" She frowned. "You're home." "Sensei, you're home," was the happy realization, but just as fast the bright grin dropped. "Sensei, there's been trouble. 3 of our boys have been accused of theft. Kana's delaying sentencing, but they're holding them in the city watchtower. We're running out of procedural loops to run through if they're sent to the prisons." Naruto ran a patient hand through Izumi's messy long red hair. Watching them, Tsunade felt she had swallowed something heavy. Under the dim light, Naruto's blonde hair glowed, and while Izumi's red hair was not the exact same shade, the similarity to another couple was jarring. Tsunade breathed deeply. That's where the similarities ended. Naruto and Izumi were not husband and wife. And though physically they looked very close in age, Naruto most likely had a heavy part in raising Izumi. "I'll go to Kana right now." Naruto shifted to include her presence, his steady eyes very aware that Tsunade had been a silent observer in their private reunion. "If you could lend Kaori-san some bedclothes and help her settle?" Sure, sensei. Kaori-san, was it? I'm Izumi." Tsunade, aware of the role she would play, stepped forward and bowed slightly. "Please take of me." "Go, sensei. I'll take care of things here." "Thank you. Good night, Izumi, Kaori-san." Ingrained training ensured Naruto made scarcely a sound as he retreated. Izumi was used to dealing with all sorts of situations. It really was no surprise that within minutes Tsunade found her hands full of bedclothes, even as the unused bed was being aired out. "Those stupid little brats. I warned them all to keep away from the 8th district. Idiots. Ugh, I've had a constant headache for the last 2 days." Naruto didn't even glance at the annoyed woman, his eyes scanning various papers stamped with the Watchtower's logo. He understood well enough Kana had pushed herself more than normal and taken on burdens not normally hers. While a great test to measure Kana's fortitude and her place in Naruto's plans for Shinji, she was still too untried to take on Mizu's politics head-on. "You've been very creative in delaying," Naruto mused. Heavy steps that had maintained a steady pace stilled. "Thank you, sensei, but honestly Rin-san was very helpful. He hasn't been able to help overtly because he said we should avoid escalating a civilian matter into one involving shinobi." That sounds right. For the time being, mutual force will keep things somewhat in check." Kana sighed deeply as she flopped into a chair. "In check? As it stands, the Watchtower will simply wear our request down. Those bastard shop owners from the 8th district are a rabid bunch. Stalemates don't work when one side holds all the cards. It's not going to pretty or neat or even entirely moral." Kana looked away, the slump of her shoulders a throwback to the simple village woman she'd once been. "It really isn't their fault, sensei. Those boys are mischievous, but they didn't do anything wrong. They didn't." For the first time Naruto paused to look up at her. "I know, Kana. You shouldn't let it cripple you. They aren't all bad people, they just make bad choices." "I know that. But you think we can forgive them like that? Just because they're too afraid of Haneda to stand up for themselves, much less anyone else. I know that. I knew about Haneda even before I came here. And that small-time thug thinks he can drain us so long as he holds something over our heads. Idiot sensei," she finished with a watery tremble. "What is justice? The Watchtower is just a silly name." Watching her, Naruto felt a distant part of himself stir. He knew those tears that threatened to spill from Kana's eyes would have moved his younger self to shift the very world. But things changed. At best, he was slightly sorry that he didn't have it in himself to be a hero. Kana was a wonderful woman, strong and dependable. She didn't know it yet, but she remained his successor for the Shinji house. And that was why, instead of sending her away, Naruto would allow her to remain and spoil a little more of her basic innocence. Because he did not forgive, did not have it in himself, and all the people that followed Haneda might have been innocent, but it did not change the fact that the moment they played this game they agreed to be his pawns just as much as they became Haneda's. "Kana? I'll need several things ready for today. Wake Masao, we'll need some things from inventory." Kana shivered. Some part of her was still a simple village woman, still young and willing to deal honestly. But she was smart enough to predict ominous storms. Understood. At 18, Kana saw a child die. Crying never did help. Tsunade slept till mid-afternoon. She slept deeply and without dreams, tiredness other than physical, finally finding respite in an unknown room within a hostile village. A deep click finally woke her up, and for a minute she didn't know what she was seeing. Finally she remembered. Izumi, The red-haired woman who during daylight kept her hair high and secured, had settled an earthenware bowl next to her bedside and a silver cup that was really too wide to be beautiful. "Good afternoon, Kaori-san." Tsunade blinked a bit dumbly. "Hello?" "Sensei said that you should avoid eating heavy food for now, but the kitchen soup is always very fine. I also brought you some water." Tsunade brought the bowl of soup to her side, and under her fingers she felt the glazed surface strangely rough. A bit reassuring, and when even her fingers felt numb after such a long sleep. "Don't mind the bowl," Izumi continued. "It was made at the kiln here by some students. Of course, not all the work can be sold, so we always end up with a mismatch of tableware." "Silver cup?" Tsunade mused as she peered at its clear depths. "Do you know what it's for?" Izumi blinked before smiling widely. I didn't know if you'd realize. Back when I lived in the lower city, things like cups and spoons and plates made out of silver just seemed like a luxury made for those with too much time. Our forge produces these. Sensei told us dirty water was the first step in creating an epidemic. We usually melt any mistakes, but there's always a couple around. I thought, and the guy's smile finally faltered. Well, it's not like I don't know what Awatsuki's reputation is. I thought I'd make you feel safer. Tsunade stared at the girl whose head had steadily become more bowed. What a strange world, she thought distantly. She was not vain when she admitted to herself she'd always been too powerful, too beautiful, or even too highborn to invite a confidence between women. In all honesty, no one that did not owe her honestly had ever confided in her with their troubles. Senju Tsunade was a woman men feared and women envied. She was obeyed and glorified. She was hard and a warrior. A leader of a nation and mother to no one. So it was strange when Tsunade raised her weathered hand and held the girl's downcast chin till she met brown eyes clearly. "There is no need. This too will be my home." Izumi smiled softly, a half-hidden grin that seemed more real than any other she had seen on the girl's face. "I shouldn't be keeping you from your meal. Do you know where Naruto is? There are a few things I should probably clear up." Izumi shrugged awkwardly, biting her lip. "Sensei's taking care of things within the village. He told me I could show you around for the time being, but he won't be available for a day or two." "What is that boy doing?" "I dunno." Kana didn't know what to say. 5 bolts of heavy silk cloth, 2 strings of pearls and 1 string of red coral. Masao did not say anything when they removed those items from the former clan's vault. For her part, Kana did not know what to say. Sensei said, something cold in his eyes. Tachibana Sho was just one of the shop owners in the 8th district. A background figure to Haneda, faceless, powerless, and useless. On her own, she'd never seriously considered Tachibana to be any sort of solution to her problem. "Bait," Sensei muttered that early morning, half the shop still dark and only delivery men on the street. Kana, carrying half the bolts of silk, shivered. Both she and Naruto Sensei were dressed in muted clothes. She'd burned with anger the moment they'd walked into the 8th district, only to be thrown completely off kilter when they met Tachibana instead of Hamida. Kana never spoke, Naruto only used the politest of tones, and Tachibana could not quite hide his glee. She burned in both anger and humiliation all the walk back. She'd finally had to ask, "May I retire? I feel a little faint." Sensei never looked at her, and there was no change in his countenance. "No. You will stay beside me till this is over. Wait." She'd had to press her lips very tightly then not to shout back. Here they were paying tribute to a useless underling when 3 of her boys got even closer and closer to being sent to the main prison. Housed in the same blocks with men and women convicted years before of murdering innocent bloodline civilians. Murdering outside of the code of war that protected civilians, bloodline or not. Because that's what they were. Or even worse, her boys wouldn't be treated like the civilians they were and sent to the shinobi prison next to attack dogs trained to tear apart boys like them at a hair trigger. So what good did catering to an underling do? She stayed beside Sensei, as he went about his chores. Stayed beside him as he met and filed and came and went. Stayed beside him as the sun climbed and he did nothing for her boys. And finally around mid-afternoon, Sensei tapped his fingers against his covered throat and finally looked at her. Catch. By then, Kana didn't have to be in the 8th district to know something was happening. They did nothing else and Kana remained too tense to sleep easily that night. Fretful thoughts distracted her enough that she scarcely paid attention to the old woman who now occupied the 3rd bed in their room. For now having Izumi at the woman's side would have to do. It wasn't that a private room could not be found if they really wanted. It had become Awatsuki's procedure to house newcomers with someone trusted. The mere fact Sensei brought the woman back with him said something about his regard for her, yet he remained silent over her status. Silent about what they should think or do with her. She had yet to meet a more exasperating man. He'd always been a big believer in them figuring out matters themselves. In a way, the old woman Kaori had been handed to her for her to figure out. Idiot Sensei. Early in the morning, Naruto met her, and together they made their way to the Watchtower's courthouse. Of course, not all the shopkeepers were there. They all had businesses to run. But enough had come to serve as witnesses. Kana scowled. She sat through the introductions, through the accusations, and through Naruto's silence. Only the absence of blood told her she hadn't yet bitten through her lip. Yar, Naruto sighed. But I really don't understand. I thought Tachibana Sho was more likely a suspect than those boys. Excuse me, Awatsuki-san? Well, and here Naruto gave a sheepish grin. Gossip isn't exactly a thing one can be above. I've heard Tachibana-san has been stealing from his own inventory. Bad business, you see, he has an unsecured debt. Why, the courthouse should know he's on the verge of forfeiting his own shop because of debt. The magistrate peered down at his papers. Yes, the court has been made aware of Tachibana-san's misfortune. And yet those boys would be used as scapegoats for missing items? 8th District is such an upscale place, certainly not the place where those boys would think of going to or even expecting of going unnoticed. I really don't understand how so many shop owners can claim they'd seen those boys in the area and trace them all the way back to Awatsuki House. They were caught nearby, Awatsuki-san, and matched the descriptions accurately. Yet no merchandise was found on them, so there really isn't any physical proof, only circumstantial. But there are enough witnesses to file just complaint, and despite being minors, the court cannot expect merchants to bear the brunt of losses. Awatsuki House must act as their legal guardian and assume responsibilities over their actions. Then, if this is to be a fair trial, I would like Tachibana Sho to join us for deliberation. He cannot be discounted as the culprit simply because lifelong friends like these shop owners would rather not suspect their own. After all, it is fair. The magistrate coughed and grimaced. Session is to end here and resume tomorrow. The court orders Tachibana Sho's appearance at such a time. Kana and Naruto filed out of the office, the former exchanging dirty looks with the uppity shop owners while the latter ignored everyone else. I don't understand. Kana muttered into her raised knees. I don't know what Sensei is doing. Sure, no need to cry. Izumi patted Kana's head in comfort. You just have to wait a little while longer. Why? Why give such a tribute and not even get Tachibana's help? We've already paid more than was ever stolen. Just have patience. Their next time in the courthouse, Kana had less anger and more confusion. She was starting to realize she really didn't know what was going on behind every polite word and gentle smile these shop owners threw at each other. And they weren't exactly being subtle about it anymore if even she could see it. Something had rattled them. Kana wasn't sure to be proud or miffed that Naruto-sensei saw through honeyed words and twitching shoulders to what really wasn't being said. Court is postponed till Tachibana-san presents himself to court. Should he miss the next scheduled meeting, charges will be dropped. Dismissed. Tachibana-san didn't appear the next day either. Complete. Kana eventually mustered enough angry pride to go past Tachibana's shop, only to nearly bowl over another pedestrian when the person manning the counter wasn't Tachibana, was in fact a man she'd seen once before simpering after Haneda. I really wasn't lying when I said Tachibana had an unsecured loan. He owes a lot more than he can afford to pay right now. Naruto-sensei had finally explained when she tracked him down. Anger had been forgotten hours ago. All Kana had right now was a deep exasperation. Then why go after us? Awatsuki House is financially secure, but it doesn't earn amounts large enough to be tempting. There's a few things I want you to remember, Kana. Today they were in the nursery. Naruto rocked a colicky infant whose complaints did not end. Awatsuki House and any place like it is very weak, more so than a poorer place would be. It's because there is something worth stealing here, and it's tempting because our visible protection is so often tempered to below reasonable levels. We can't appear to ever be armed. What happened, Sensei? You didn't do anything but bribe Tachibana. How could things settle so easily? I didn't bribe him, not that he knew that. But truth and appearances, you remember, are so often very different things. Blue eyes were distantly cold, and perhaps it was a good thing Naruto-sensei had started to wear his headdress. Oftentimes it is more important to know how a person thinks, because then you know how they can become undone. And the thing about bribes is that they are either as secret as they should be, nor are they ever large enough for everyone's greed. Tachibana is weak with wealth. He knows enough to avoid handling money laundered by Haneda. He wants more than he should, and thus now owes more than he can afford to. But he really doesn't know how to control himself. Did you think that bribe of ours would ever make it to Haneda? Or that those supportive neighbors wouldn't know that Tachibana is filching it away or ask for their own share? Exploitation is always such a messy business, more so when you have enough people to incite a mob and its irrationality coupled with loose mouths. Those involved in illegal business tend to find illegal solutions to irritations. And while Haneda himself was very smart in using the law to trap us, but he still is a small-time racketeer, and he remains one because he can't control his temper. Altogether, it creates a situation that has Tachibana losing a few fingers at best or becoming another faceless man in the landfill at worst. What I said that day in court remains true. Tachibana probably is taking from his own inventory and reporting it as theft. The court is meant to be fair, but the people staffing it aren't. The moment they realize there might actually be a chance we trump them, they dismiss this case. Letting those boys go free is a small price to pay to avoid having to record a precedent where Awatsuki House is being defrauded. Naruto cooed at the baby in his arms, who was finally calming down. A perfectly normal child if it wasn't for another set of transparent eyelids. How can we remain such a devilish house when we are made the victim? Kana couldn't say anything. Her chest shook and it took a few baffled seconds to realize she was laughing. Those boys, they were never prove innocent, were they? No. Naruto hummed at the infant in his arms. Justice, and all Kana could do is laugh. She was 18 when a child died in her arms, murdered by the people around her for being born wrong. Where was justice then? Where was justice now? Why did she think it would be different? Why did you want me to see all of this? Kana finally asked, having calmed down. You've never invited me before. And he hadn't. It was only now that she fully realized he'd probably done many things in the past like this. Never overt, because that brought too much attention, but pushes here and there. People who thought they could exploit Awatsuki House suddenly found themselves cornered by their own problems, more concerned with someone taking advantage of them. It didn't stop the thought that their actions might mean Tachibana's permanent disappearance. This time everything was relatively clean. I'm responsible for creating the situation, but I didn't do anything to push them into acting like how they did. We as the Awatsuki House are still very weak. We cannot win by having the louder voice. You must understand this and apply it how you will. Very soon it will be your responsibility to be in my position. Even if he made her tremble in pent-up frustration, Naruto-sensei had always been a cornerstone of her world. Had been since the moment she handed a dead child to him, and he took her in as well. She might not have been raised by him like so many others she now worked with, but she had been saved just as much. Hey, are you going somewhere? Dark blue eyes curved gently. No, I'm not. You are. Are you evicting me? Have I done something wrong? Calm down, he sighed. I've never been good at breaking news. Ugh. Anyway, Shinji House will be completed in a few months. The project has been kept secret to avoid tampering, but you should begin preparing yourself. Once completed, you will be the headmistress. Headmistress me? Kana was embarrassed to hear her voice squeak. Yes, was the calm reply, a little insulting considering he had just changed her world. Turned it upside down as he continued to hum to a grumpy baby. Me? You've been my assistant long enough to understand the administrative side of things. These past few days was the last lesson I have to give you. Protecting doesn't always mean being a shield. Sometimes you have to be the knife that cuts others in the dark. Sensei, I don't think I can do this. Kana, you are so very much stronger than you believe. She mulled his words quietly. Tried to imagine his responsibilities, without the comfort that he was only a call away. And to Shinji of all places. That's not all right? Why did you choose Shinji? Even without looking, she could tell Naruto-sensei was smiling at her. Various reasons. It's no secret we are reaching capacity here. A lot did have to do with what I could buy with the budget available. But the biggest reason of all, Kana, what do you think of our Mizuki's chances of remaining in office? No, we're due for a civil war, aren't we? Probably. And what kind of target do you think Awatsuki House makes? She smiled grimly, for the first time feeling like she saw the whole picture, or at least as much as she could. Will we make it in time? Yes. A bare, pale hand soothed the infant's brow. The picture looked odd to Kana before she realized exactly what was wrong. Naruto-sensei usually wore a pair of warm leather gloves. Gloves she could recall settling over her eyes the first time she stumbled into Awatsuki's gates, a babe's cold body and arms. His hands were rarely bare, she realized. Strange she hadn't noticed. The last few days had given birth to a nagging thought. It began simple enough. He'd come upon Tsunade in the greenhouses, whacking a student with a paper fan. She then proceeded to go off on a 20-minute lecture regarding the proper way to trim Quietus ridiculus folium, and yes, the moment they crushed the red vein leaves they broke the capillaries that made the plant even remotely useful. Had Shin's house come about because, somehow, somewhere, Tsunade, the mother of modern medicine, would be there to see its birth? Sensei? Excuse me? He said, reminding himself it was no time to be lost in thoughts. He was meeting with what would become Shin's staff. And Kana, slated to be headmistress, was currently frowning at him. Sensei, would it not be better to send the younger children, the babies, to Shinj? If this conflict comes as predicted, they should be the last people to be in the middle of it. A good portion of Shinj's future staff grimaced, no doubt remembering their own days in the midst of war. While most were over 20, only Kana could claim something over 30. As such, they had all lived through at least 2 of Mizu's inner conflicts. Naruto simply drummed his fingers on the table. Your staff will be very limited. I don't see how we can arrange things to deal with children that need constant attention and supervision. So far, my method seems the most ideal. Always, he could feel shadows of himself, and dozens of hands and thoughts reaching their own task. Talking, reaching, holding, falling, listening, 1,000 moments in the blink of an eye. A lesser man would have long since gone mad. Naruto was only grateful so few knew the actual implications of creating solid clones or thought to build his level of sensitivity with them. Laiko frowned from across the table. Then wouldn't it be better if you were to relocate to Shinj and Kana remain in Awatsuki? Naruto ignored Kana's queasy face. Again, I am more suited to dealing with matters here in Mizu. When the next conflict comes, we have no way of knowing if it will be bloodless or spark off into chaos. This time around, Awatsuki will be a target by virtue of the types of bloodlines housed here, and yes, that was also true last time around. However, this time there are enough children old enough and trained enough to make this place a worthwhile capture. Even now our boundaries are being tested. If a time should come for me to call the protections laid down, protections I've kept secret, I must be here due to so. Our boundaries? Hein asked, blinking curiously. Would Shin share such boundaries? To an extent, yes. Naruto admitted. By virtue of my presence they are stronger, but Shinj has also been retrofitted to include seal wards. They probably didn't realize what he'd admitted to them, he mused silently. Probably didn't realize this was the secret Awatsuki's enemies were only now hesitantly coming to grips with. Didn't realize this was also what had even allowed Awatsuki to survive more than one midnight drunken torch run. But most of all, didn't realize what it meant for Naruto to know anything about seals. Because this was also a fact, seal masters only came in 2 varieties, the very old and the very young. The young were just being taught the mysteries, but only a fraction of them would survive to become very old. Seal crafting as a whole was a lot more likely to explode than work as it should. So Shinj will be more of a specialty school? Yes. I plan to relocate most of the trades to Shinj. Teaching and production is a lot more vulnerable to interruptions here in the city. Only the very young, those pursuing a shinobi career, or those involved in apprenticeships or work within Mizu will remain. But what I hope is to specialize Shinj in the medical field. Everything from forging specific medical tools to weaving the coated gauze used on cuts and burns. Everyone in the table eyed each other, suddenly realizing they were chosen because they made up a large portion of their trained population. Better yet, many of them had already served outside apprenticeships. They would be the teachers. Kana, however, saw the immediate problem. Sensei, I can see how all of us would be able to build up many of the basic and intermediate skills, but to become a true professional we would need a master's help. And not just an outside master but an in-resident one. Naruto's eyes were wry as he gestured for Hein, the nearest to the door, to open it. Please call in Kaori-san. They all eyed the old woman who nearly glared at all of them with mixed feelings. This Kaori-san, a trained medical specialist. There is very little she does not know or cannot replicate within the medical field. I advise everyone who studies under her to learn well. Kaori-san is a very harsh taskmaster. From across the room, Tsunade smiled at Naruto. She was never too old for one more adventure. Naruto tapped the desk. Tap tap tap. The clock was winding down. Slowly, those faces around the table lost their hesitancy and gave way to excited grins. They were all young and ready to shape the very world. Tap tap tap. The only difference between spreading blood and a flower is the rate at which they bloom. In the shadows, blood can hide as just another puddle. The perpetual trash that always seems to accumulate in alleyways stains all water, rain clear or guilty crimson, the same shade of gray. But nothing can ever hide the smell. If asked to describe the scent of blood, most are prone to say it smells like copper. Naruto would like to call them all liars. It's not like he doesn't understand the metallic quality of red blood cells, their iron content, or all manner of explanations. But anyone that says it smells like copper is still a liar. He smells it before he sees the proof, but that is enough to have him frozen and an ugly snarl on his lips. It is only Providence he is wearing his headdress. For a moment he does not see the grimacing medic, or hear the whispers and wails. He is not there. Life and death, duality and contradiction and benediction and everything and nothing. Darkness tears his body apart, and the only warmth is drying blood, all his. It hurts. He is crying and waiting for the end. Please. Is this all that he was ever meant to have? 3 days of unending agony in a purpose that is not his, was never his. Never. He spasms again, and only pain still gives him reassurance that his vessel is still his broken body. Red pain, red death, red life, red skies, his mind chants its twisted lullaby. Wails assault his ears, and only his gritted teeth reassure him they're not his and he is not somewhere else, bound to the ground as everything he is being taken. It is not his hateful cry, despair and rage and breaking, born so many years ago in a cave only he knows. Naruto knows, still blood smells like death, the intangible phenomenon humans aren't meant to understand as anything other than an end. He knows the human mind breaks when it first smells beneath the metallic quality of blood. Healers and killers understand most. Flowing blood smells like struggle and life and power and all manner of opaque things. But even they have distaste for blood that has been still for too long. Still blood, a million deaths, here and there, and the Shinigami laughs each time, is what death truly smells like. If you are going to faint, step back, a waspish watchtower guard rebukes. His face is curled in disdain, and he does not even try to hide the fact that Awatsuki Naruto makes him uncomfortable. Nothing of what Naruto feels is betrayed when he speaks. If you could? The guard twitches. I know. Come this way. The body has been straightened. Laid out as if it was already time to wrap flesh and bones and last testimony in unbleached linen for the coming pyre. A sliver of milky eye shines dully from beneath a mangled lid. Whoever perpetuated the crime was messy. Simple clothes have been sheared and shredded half a dozen times, exposing cuts and stabs. Here and there a patch of the textile's original coloring still struggled through, but for the most part the figure is mockingly dressed in the color worn by the priest of the main religion in Mizu, appropriately enough an unashamed red. He goes about carefully. A clean patch of matted hair is nutmeg brown. An exposed elbow reveals 2 parallel scars the length of a hand. A mole hides where hair meets vulnerable neck. Finally, a birthmark hidden on the curve of an ear is excavated from underneath a layer of dried blood. Rocking back on his heels, Naruto gazes at the young man, because that's who it was, and tries to catalog his feelings. A restless unease plays on his nerves, but that has more to do with the visage than the act. Beneath that unease he knows the lullaby his mind sings. Dread. A howling beast. But that disquiet has been a constant companion for many years. Worry as well. Not for the dead but for what this act might mean. Why was the man killed? Was it the prelude to some greater act? Who was responsible? But there was also a shiver of excitement. The young man, even now rotting and dead, was a piece in a larger puzzle. The beginning of a game where lives were wagered and blood paid. That was all. A boy dead, and that was all. Naruto could admit to himself he would never be a normal man, not like the people that walked around him, or even like the gutted boy on the ground. He'd been desensitized too harshly, derailed, destroyed, doomed, deformed. Some part of himself was still playing at human. He dusted his hands of red flakes, and as they drifted downward, he imagined a dice was rolled in the same fashion. A flick and shake and destiny was made with the soft tap-tap of chance. Well? The sour-faced watchtower guard finally interrupted, impatient enough to overcome his reluctance of voluntarily addressing the notorious Awatsuki. Tsuji Kenichi, age 19, orphan, resident of Iketin, 3rd District. The guard grumbled. One of yours, eh? Naruto blinked back at him. He coughed. Right then. When was the last time you saw him? April, 3 years ago. Suji voluntarily transferred from my guardianship to Mizu Ni Orphanage in the 4th district. The guard frowned and stamped his foot on some non-existent bother. He was normal then. None of that, he coughed, uncomfortable with those penetrating dark blue-violet eyes. That. Naruto continued to blink at the guard. Apparently. Do you know anyone with a motive to kill the boy? He glanced again at the rotting body and thought. He thought of his own house. He thought about Suji's angry scowl. He thought about a crying girl 2 years younger and bruises the shape of handprints on her wrists. He thought about the ultimatum he gave a 16-year-old boy. He thought about his own icy hands as he gently held the boy and the promises made. Suji hated the world, completely, unchangeably, eternally. He hated more than he feared and was thus oddly brave in the face of superior power. He only ever feared one man. A kind man who smiled as he whispered rebukes with a Shinigami's smile. Naruto shrugged. From beginning to end he was only in my care 4 months. Suji was not comfortable at my house. Suji was passionate. It was what first attracted his attention. But bleeding passion that taints the rest of his words was unacceptable. And unfortunately for Suji's drowning soul, Naruto did not indulge in redemption. The guard had finally begun to face him fully now that the case was less like dirty blood murder and more in the line of normality. Apparently, normal he could deal with. Anything else you recall? Naruto absent-mindedly frowned at a stain on his sleeve. Besides what I've already mentioned, no. Suji did not remain with me long, nor did he ever return. The guard grunted as he looked away. Unseen, Naruto smiled wryly. Evidently even his courage had limits. Will that be all? I have other duties to attend. You can go. The watchtower will send summons if needed. Neither bothered to say goodbye. It wasn't a pleasant meeting either way. Onlookers gazed at him curiously but made little fuss over who he was. Kana fell into step next to him. She was pale and her hands trembled faintly, but other than that there was only determination in her stance. Was it one of ours? Naruto thought of a crying girl and fading bruises. No. In an ideal world it would have been unkind to find relief in the fact as Kana did. But even at her most naive she'd known to stand by those that belonged to her. At least that's one grace. We don't have to worry about this matter as busy as things are with the move to Shinji. His eyes flicked over to the woman at his side, not the least relaxed much to her trepidation. Not quite. The fact that the murdered was a resident for 4 months before he was persuaded to leave is trying. So he is ours? Not in that sense. Unfortunately, he did not coexist peacefully and Kana. We are a private organization with the luxury of expelling those unsuitable. Kana flushed. Sensei, did things really have to end like this for that boy? Don't you think if we'd helped him more perhaps it could have made all the difference? A boy dead and that was all. Kana, there will come a time when you have to make the same decision. The boy was abusing other residents, those weaker and younger than himself. Warnings can only do so much, and when that fails even constant attention must eventually abate. There is never that perfect guarantee that things will not turn out wrong. Help them or not, protect the others or not, that will be your choice. Which is the most danger? Where is the most potential? There are consequences to each action, Kana. Kana nearly looked back, but only sheer will kept her looking forward. And only imperfect solutions. The woman at his side remained silent as she mulled what she'd heard. Why were you so insistent we come? If he wasn't one of ours? Betrayal is a science. You just have to find the person most willing to talk for the least amount of force. A captive is worth little if it takes 3 weeks to break them. He is worth considerable more if it takes 30 minutes. There is no value in what they know, only how long it takes for it to be shared. Kana looked a little queasy, but she kept her gaze straight. And did he know anything of worth? Everything is worth something, even if it is only the furniture placement in a room. Information is after all half the battle. But that isn't half as valuable as knowing who is the hierarchy. Something even that boy would know. And you think it's possible the boy was killed for his association to Awatsuki? Will anyone else be targeted? Naruto shrugged. It's a possibility. As of yet there's no definite yes or no about anything, but that is the worst-case scenario. Kana frowned at the pessimism but understood it. Then why kill him? He should have little loyalty to Awatsuki. I doubt it would have taken much to reveal what he knew. He scoffed and muttered something that sounded like Mizu's stubbornness. Conventional tactics. Never leave someone that can stab you at the most inopportune time. Then why not get rid of the corpse? Surely they must have known it would be found if it was dumped like it was. More tactics. Messages and warnings are sent through more than words. That boy was a bloody way to butt horns with Awatsuki without actually committing an offense. No one that belongs to Awatsuki has been hurt, only someone who could easily have been one. When Kana gazed at the sky, she was unsurprised to find no deliverance. The more she learned about Naruto-sensei, the more she gave depth to a figure in her mind who'd been painted white in altruism. Naruto-sensei may be doing the world a service, but it did not stop the man from having a crafty mind. She didn't know what to think of her increasingly tainted reality. There was a certain comfort in becoming less blind, but it did not